need no introduction. However, we'll start first. Mayor Greg Habib, City of Goose Creek, Mayor Willie Haney, Town of Mount Pleasant, Mayor Christie Rainwater, City of Hanahan, Mayor Keith Summey, City of North Charleston, Mayor John Teklenberg, City of Charleston, Supervisor Johnny Cribb, Berkeley County. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I would like you all to just give a brief introduction, not to exceed 2 minutes. And we'll start with Mayor Greg Habib.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that very much. We were asked us to talk about what our governments are doing to address growth very quickly, or as quickly as we can. And so in a couple of minutes, I'll tell you that what we've done, or what I've tried to do in here in the city of Goose Creek, is embrace it. The fact of the matter is, I don't particularly care for the terms managed growth or limit growth, because it's coming, and all of us know that, in fact, we need it. So what we've tried to do in the city of Goose Creek is participate in our growth, participate in the plan of our growth, and be an active participant and planner in our growth. When we build houses, we want to build communities so that we can serve the people in those communities from within. That's sort of our goal there. Our recent comprehensive plan that we're just about to finish up, one of our goals from the very beginning of when I became mayor was to create a reasonable and achievable land use plan. Not pie in the sky, not a dream, not anything like that. Something that we knew we could achieve. And so that's what we hope will come out of this. Well, not that we hope, it's what we know will come out of this, the comprehensive plan. That and a plan forward to how we move.
Thank you, Mayor Habib. Next, we'll have Mayor Will Haney.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I want to say what an honor it is to be on here with these other distinguished mayors. And if anybody around the region wonders what kind of collegiality we have and what type of communication we have, just look back at 2020 and dealing in this pandemic, and we were all talking and exchanging information and trying to figure our way through the most unexpected of circumstances. And I know that I probably would have been in a lot worse shape were it not for these fellow panelists. I want to also say in that sense, before we get to anything else, nothing is as important in our region right now as getting life back to normal and protecting life. And so I encourage everybody to get their vaccine. We are fortunate in Mount Pleasant. We have a presence of the Medical University, East Cooper Hospital, and Roper, and all three of them have come together in magnificent ways to get these mass drive-through vaccinations, in addition to all the other things that's going on. So if you're listening, please do that, and let's get life back to normal as much as we can. So speaking of Mount Pleasant, we're probably I guess we're probably the most beat up group that's probably represented here today, because there's an old saying that says change is difficult at first, messy in the middle, but the end result is beautiful. So Mount Pleasant, if you go back a good many years, was totally reactive in terms of growth. And it has taken some hard change and some messy stuff in the middle for us to try to get to a beautiful end. Mount Pleasant had 4 mayors in 10 years. And in the last 3 election cycles, 15, 17, and 19, 11 of 12 council seats that were up for election have changed hands. So it is hard to have a vision and to do anything proactive when you have that kind of turnover. And so we slowed down our 10-year comprehensive plan process. We took the time we needed by extending our own self-imposed deadline a little while, so that the most newly elected members of our council that would represent the will of our citizens would be on there. And I'm pleased to say that after years of rancor, and I came on council in 2015, and when you discuss growth or planning or anything, our council chambers were full. We were getting emails, we were getting calls. It was unpleasant sometimes to go to the grocery store. But here we are now with a unanimously passed comprehensive plan that I think is very common sense for what Mount Pleasant will be in the future. The highlights are we have scaled back some density, and people may not know this, but if you look up the numbers, per square mile, Mount Pleasant is more dense than Charleston and North Charleston. Those are the published numbers. I'm not sure how you get there. It doesn't necessarily feel that way, but we have been. So we have taken out what might become these too high density areas, but we have left them open for redevelopment. Some of the older shopping centers and major shopping areas that may be mixed use in the right time and in the right way. One of the things that we have done is we have stopped making short-sighted decisions, like before I got on council, rezoning our only remaining workforce housing designated tract of land for single-family residences, which came on the market years ago at over $500,000. And in today's superheated market, those are probably $600,000. And the town rezoned one of our last remaining light industrial tracts where you can get good jobs and light manufacturing and that type thing. And those are residential homes now. So the other thing we did when we put in a permit allocation system, instead of just fighting over who feels how about our rate of growth, we did a study of our level of service of all the things our taxpayers give us money for: police, fire, public services, parks, roads, all of those things. And we came to a number that is based on us not reaching a failing level of service in any of those things, because that would be, malfeasance on our part to take our taxpayers' dollars and deliver a failing level of service. So that's where we are in Mount Pleasant right now. And as we look forward, we're trying to bring the jobs here that are on our side of the bridge so that our neighbors, all of whom are up on my screen, don't have all of the people from Mount Pleasant commuting into your town in the morning and back in the afternoon.
Oh.
And if we can get those job bases here in Mount Pleasant, we're well suited for about 3 of the 5 high impact sectors that our CRDA is recruiting for.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that, Mayor Haney. And next we'll have Mayor Christie Rainwater.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining with us to just dig into some things we could do in the Charleston area. Love being on the panel with all these other mayors and working together for the Charleston region. But the truth is, one of the visions that I have for our city and for our community is it's not just about what we could do as leaders, but it's about what every person in the community can do to make the area better. And so a little statement, I guess, that I use pretty regularly is let's be difference makers in our extraordinary city. And so if you're on this summit right now, there's a reason. You have a passion, you have a purpose, and you're using it for the good of not only yourself, but your community. And so I'm excited this morning to just share a little bit about Hanahan and what we're doing, but how we could also partner with you and collaborate to make sure that the Charleston area stays the amazing place that it is.
Well, thank you, Rainwater. You're absolutely correct. I agree. It's all about the community. So thank you for that. Next, we'll have Mayor Keith Summey.
Wow, but we're reconnected. We are moving forward very well. If you've been around the Park Circle area in recent times, you'll know that there's not any vacant lots left. Everything is doing infill. One of the issues that we do have is affordable housing, because the prices of the newer construction and even the older houses in the area have mushroomed. We recently have approved through no liking by the adjoining neighborhood a subdivision that's going to allow 220 affordable condos to be built for sale in the $170,000 bracket for 3-bedroom units, but it's off of the Remount Road corridor, which is going to help create affordable housing for the working class folks that are working in that area, including the school teachers that really don't have affordable housing in that area anymore. So we're looking at ways that we can continue to make sure that we have affordable housing within the city. The growth has been phenomenal and it continues, but we just have to make sure that it balances out so that the people who work in North Charleston can afford to live in North Charleston as well. So this is not an issue we had 20 years ago, but is definitely an issue now. So we're working to deal with that. North Charleston is unique Anybody that works in the city of Charleston that doesn't live in the city of Charleston, but lives anywhere between Somerville and the city of Charleston, they drive through North Charleston to get to work. The same thing for those from East Cooper that come over to work. The same thing for West Ashley. We are the center point of that traffic. And so the numbers are continuing to grow. I'm very proud to see what's going on in Berkeley and Dorchester counties up Interstate 26, where you now have major development, both industrial and commercial, but you've also got a lot of additional housing that's going up. One of my neighbors, a young couple, actually works that far out and drives back and forth every day, and they're on separate shifts. But I am proud of the fact that now housing is being offered for the growth areas of economic development. And I think that's something that we all have to learn to live with. Traffic is a major issue for us. This morning, there was an accident, I think on 526 coming from Mount Pleasant. So it backed up. There was an accident on Interstate 26 coming in. It was backed up. And so the filtration of that traffic over to Rivers Avenue, people trying to get to work, it doesn't take long to back it up again. So it's just something we all have to continue to work on transportation and traffic and making life better for our people. It's just horrible that you work 8 hours a day on a job and it takes 2 hours to drive back and forth to work. So we have to work on those things, and hopefully the state, through this additional monies that they're getting, is going to be able to advance some of the road projects that we need to change. But I think as long as we are all willing to work together, we will always have issues that we have differences on. But at the end of the day, most of the major things we can always come together on, because it has a direct effect on all of us.
Well, thank you, Mayor Summey, for that. Next, we'll have Mayor John Teklenberg.
Well, thank you, Katisha, for having me and us with y'all this morning. And Charleston is a growing city, as we are a growing region. And so we think about how to grow wisely and accommodate that growth and add affordability. And I guess when you get down to it, the two places that we would like to see future growth and development and density is along where public transit will be enhanced, where the low country rapid transit line will be running, but also importantly, where high ground is. You know, when we're in the low country, we need to think about that. And so for the first time in our comprehensive planning process, we've engaged with our consultants who helped us with the Dutch Dialogues efforts to really drill down on our topography, our high ground versus low ground, and the impact, the implications of that on future development, density, and growth. And so if I may just very briefly, if y'all would enable me to share my screen, I'd like to show you two quick maps of what they've come up with. And I think it's fascinating, and not just for the city of Charleston, but for all of our region to be thinking about. But it says the host has disabled me. So maybe you'll allow me to show that later. But in a nutshell, if you look at elevation above sea level, you want to reduce density long-term in those areas that are low-lying. And so they did a study of the whole region based upon a 3-foot rise in sea level over the next 50 years. We need to start thinking about where we should be building in the future. I know for decades, we've all been subsidized by federal flood insurance to build in low-lying and maybe not so smart areas. We need to be a little more proactive about building in higher ground and increasing our density where it makes sense long-term. Our existential threat for the city of Charleston is sea level rise and extreme weather, protecting us from rising waters. So let's build in the smart places where it'll be sustainable over the long haul.
Thank you, Mayor Teklenberg. Next, we'll have Supervisor Johnny Krug.
Thank you and good morning. I like the way Mayor Habib started this off. Growth is here, growth has come. Since the year 2000, Berkeley County is in the top 1% in growth in the country. I think we rank 31st out of 3,142 counties. So I ran on a platform of planning. Like I said, the growth is here, and the folks need us to focus on what we're responsible for. In the county, it starts with roads. I'm an old Parks and Rec guy, so it's a tough thing for me to continue to say roads, 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 but that's where it's at. So when I got here, the first thing we tried to attack is our sales tax program and how are we fulfilling that commitment so we can get people to their jobs and to home and to the parks and rec fields and the restaurants and back without gridlock and impacting their quality of life. And wasn't enthused with the pace that it was going, and there were some things that we needed to get done. Recently in Hanahan, we broke ground on Railroad Avenue, which might be the oldest road project anywhere on the books in our region. So we really started attacking road projects. But at the county, growth, I believe it brings challenges and opportunities. You got to be a realist about both. There's some really good parts of growth, and there's some tremendous challenges. So at the county, those challenges are our facilities that the public needs to come to. Recently, we opened up an expansion at the county facility. Our DMV in Berkeley County, it was woefully inadequate, and we've provided a space to have 17 windows at a DMV, which is going to be tremendous to the public. And also some public safety EOC 911 center that we put in there. But the more people that move in your areas, like our animal center was inadequate. So right now we're under construction, and we'll cut the ribbon on a new animal center in June. And every facility that we have is really facing the impact. The last thing you want to spend money on is a jail. Right now we're expanding the kitchen at our jail, the laundry room at our jail, and we plan to actually add on to our jail about a $20 million project. And then our courthouse has become lacking and inadequate. So one of the major projects you'll hear the county announce in the near future is a large new county courthouse. So we basically have to keep up with the infrastructure that's needed when growth comes. Are our sewer plants ready to receive that growth? And a lot of times that creates a lot of anxiety for developers and folks moving in. So right now, I believe we got about $40 or $50 million in sewer capacity projects going on. And to go back to roads, about $170 million in road projects that will hit the streets within 4 or 5 months. So we're trying to focus on what we need to do to help manage and mitigate this growth and the services that we provide to the residents.
Thank you for that, Supervisor. So now I know that we have a lot of information that we would like to share in such little time. We'll get to our first question with Mayor Teklenberg. Mayor, so much is made of the concept live, work, play, and how that should be applied to growth and development. How has the city embraced it, and where does that role show going forward?
Well, thank you. I think it's a function of trying to create density in housing near where people work. And that's a concept I had in mind, particularly. I know North Charleston shares this with us, to try to develop along the future low country rapid transit line so that people, even if they don't live right next to where they work, they can easily get there and not jam up the roadways so much as we're seeing. So, and once again, thinking about the future of building in higher grounds, there are areas in the city, the upper spine of the peninsula, along Sam Rittenberg, West Ashley, Maybank Highway area on Johns Island, Clements Ferry Road going up in the Cainhoy Peninsula and Berkeley County. These areas are high ground and suitable for future development and density within our city. And we just feel if we can enhance affordability near where people work. And of course, we feel like we've created a great place in the city of Charleston for people to enjoy themselves, to work, to recreate, to pray, to play. So just that idea of having that future development occur where people are close to the nexus of their lives and what's going on, and a sense of place is a terrific vision for the future.
Thank you, Mayor Teklenberg. Our next question, Mayor Habib. Mayor, Goose Creek has been transforming in recent years and is now a hot spot in our region. Can you talk a little about your economic strategy and how it has been successful?
You're on mute, Mayor.
I got it. I saw that. Thank you. That's the first time I've done that, actually.
They say
I
it's
hope
the
that
most common expression of the English language today. You're on mute.
it is now. You're absolutely right. So to follow up on what Mayor Teklenberg was saying, is as part of our strategy, ours is a little multiple, or my thoughts are that it's multiple. So A, live, work, and play. Yes, you want to create, anytime you're building a community, building houses, you want to build a community. So you want to serve as many people that live in that new community in that community. Can you put a grocery store in there? Can you put an opportunity to work? Can you put recreation in there? If you put jobs where people are, people where jobs are, shops where jobs and people are, they don't have to travel to get there. And that's the biggest impact on the quality of life that you can have, is through economic development. But we're also in a position in the city of Goose Creek. We've got Highway 176 and Highway 52 that travel through our city. That's 80 whatever thousand cars a day. And so folks that live in the northern part of the county, if they're going somewhere, they're going through Goose Creek. We need to, and we are continuing to work on taking advantage of that and making Goose Creek their destination, right? So if we make Goose Creek their destination, again, it's going to reduce the opportunity for more traffic in North Charleston and in Charleston. If they can come here and stop here, then we need to take advantage of that and give them the opportunity to meet their needs here in the city of Goose Creek. Its successes, we are growing, and we're growing commercially in a way that makes sense for us now. We're still fairly far behind. We've had a long way to go. When you grow residentially, and all of you know this, you have to grow proportionately with commercial services or with commercial and retail opportunities. Otherwise, your tax base gets all out of whack, your traffic gets worse, people have to leave to meet their needs. Well, we're catching up. Through our redevelopment incentive ordinance in the 52-176 Red Bank Triangle area incentive zone, we're getting some people really interested in renovating and making new. Our first project is one that we were part of, where we partnered with a company, CityVolve, that did a lot of work in North Charleston for you, Mayor Summey, where we're going to have our first brewery. Will be right here in the city of Goose Creek. Everybody's very excited about that. It may sound small, but it's not. And there'll be a lot of people that have that will want to take advantage of that. And it'll hopefully will be a catalytic event for the rest of that area in redeveloping that area. So we're seeing growth in areas where it makes sense. There's obviously a new project, or not new anymore, but Carnes Crossroads is in the city of Goose Creek, and it is growing. They can't build fast enough out there. We still have opportunity for residential growth down Brickhope, but we're seeing the commercial element in and around Roper Berkeley and in Carnes Crossroads to support that area, right? So if we're building houses, we're also building the retail element to serve those folks out there. We have more and more interest in commercial opportunities here in the city of Goose Creek. So we're seeing success. We're seeing success incrementally. We have a long way to go, but we're very proud of what we've accomplished.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Habib. Continuing with economic development, Mayor Haney, I wanted to ask, you recently mentioned that economic development is going to become a focal point for you and the town. Can you talk a little about that effort and what you see for Mount Pleasant?
Yeah, thank you very much. Before the pandemic got here, we were working, we had an advisory panel, we had a staff member who was an economic development officer. That was their job. And then we had turnover in the staff, and then we had the pandemic and everything. And it turns out that was a blessing in disguise, because we would have hated to have had all these working hours and volunteer hours of a panel to come up with a strategic plan for economic development that may be not as current and may be outdated, given I think a lot has changed. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at ways, we're going to look at incentives. We've already done it with our zoning and our comp plan for ways to make sure that if you are an employer and you want the quality of life that we have in Mount Pleasant, we're very proud of protecting that quality of life. If you want great schools, which we have in Mount Pleasant, and low crime, that we're the place to locate your business. We're very well suited for things in the financial sector, life sciences, like SC Bio recruits for the state, and for internet technology, especially cybersecurity and things like that. And we actually did a tour a couple of years ago of the businesses in Mount Pleasant that are very high tech. And they're in the most amazing offices you've ever seen. They don't look like what you think a high-tech business would be in. So we're gonna put that together. We think we need to market ourselves better. And I'm leaving this meeting. I sit on the board with some of my colleagues of the Charleston Regional Development Alliance. That meeting starts at 10:30. I don't know if we'll make it at the beginning or not. We'll finish here first. But we're working very closely and with the county to let people know that Mount Pleasant is open for business. We have all the things that I think people will want, and we're going to go out and get it.
Thank you, Mayor Haney. Mayor Summey, in your introduction, you start to talk about traffic. Mayor, traffic is a main concern for all our municipalities. The Low Country Rapid Transit is a plan that can help in the area, and a majority of the line runs through your jurisdiction. North Charleston has recently made news about the LRT overlay district and how that may be a game changer for your city and the success of the line. Can you talk a little about it and how the overlay came to be?
Well, our staff has been working, looking at the route and the old Rivers Avenue corridor in the older areas, basically from Remount Road south. The changes that need to be made so that we can bring more activity to that corridor for retail development and quality of life issues for the residents along that corridor. And so we've put into a plan of how we look at our new 20-year growth plan, what we look for changes, not putting anybody that's there out of business, but if it goes out of business and it's closed for more than 6 months, the new zoning applies. Any new development, building the businesses out closer to the street with the parking behind it, creating more of a walking environment along those corridors. North Charleston inherited most of the places that we have. When we became a city, I think the newest city compared to us is Hanahan. Y'all maybe a year or so behind us, but we're celebrating our 50th anniversary in a couple of years. And so we're having to take a lot of stuff that we inherited, and our growth has been phenomenal. We've seen some of our inner areas of the city that have been complete Park Circle, for an example, completely picked back up. We're working in the Chicora area to do that now, but that Rivers Avenue corridor sort of affects all of it. So we're looking at what we can do for the future, that the rapid transit serves that area, but it also enhances opportunity in that area for better quality of life for the folks who live there, and that those businesses along there become more updated and are able to serve the people of North Charleston and the surrounding areas even better. But being still a young city, one of the main things that we've been working on in the last few years is quality of life issues for our citizens. We have built 2 new senior centers within the last 3 or 4 years that are open. We've got 2 more in the plan. We've built a new 3-pool complex that will host events, but also serve the community well. New 3-gym complex that we built right at Remount and I-26. We've now gone back and started looking with all the growth we've had and all the annexations we've had. Now it's time for us to go back and reinvest in the quality of life for those folks who live within those boundaries. It's a challenge, but one I truly enjoy that we're able to do for our citizens. While we're a city of somewhere around 120,000 people, in any given day, there's 350,000 people that come through North Charleston. So when they're driving through, they may be your citizens when they get home, but when they're coming through, they're mine. And we try to treat them with the same respect that we do the people who live in North Charleston as well. So it's a challenge, but one we like. Growth has been something that all of us have enjoyed and cried about because of the massive growth that has occurred so quickly. Keeping up with the needs of that growth is always a challenge. But I think some of the greatest things that have occurred is like with our fire service. All of us work together now. And I tell people, if my house is on fire, I don't care what the name on the door is when it pulls up to help me put it out. And I think that that's one area that we all can follow suit on other things that we have going on in our communities, how we can work together to make the quality of life for all of our people better and provide the services that we need.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Mayor Summey. We're definitely looking forward to the rapid transit. My next question is for Mayor Rainwater. Mayor, Hanahan, much like Goose Creek, sits neatly and quietly in the middle of our region, but has grown steadily in recent years. One thing you have done successfully is to create more flexible zoning and accommodate for townhomes, duplex, quadplex development. How did you approach it, and why do you think the town embraced it?
I really think the principles of leadership apply across the board to anything that we're facing, and it includes this. So relationships, visions, and goals is where it started. Staff definitely feels comfortable talking to council, working with council. And so Jeff Hayjack, our wonderful economic development director and planner, came and just shared some opportunity for redevelopment, as well as looking at strengths and weaknesses. Hey, we have this thing called the missing middle. I remember when he came to my office with that book and I was like, what is that? Help me understand. And so being a leader, being open to your team of experts, as a mayor, we have a lot of different departments that we need to know about. So relying on the right people that we've put in place to give us that information to further understand it and then be able to make decisions and move forward with it. So once I understood that, and he presented it to our council, we have an excellent council, a great team of people that work together, and just really said, this is opportunity for redevelopment. This is where needs are that we can meet in the community. Let's look at doing this. And of course, going through each step for the rezoning, for making sure everything is set up, really just really having the batter be able to come to the plate and go to town. And so once we set that all up and made those changes on the ordinances and with the zoning, then pursuing the development, saying, what do we want here? What are we specifically looking for? Kind of like Mayor Habib shared earlier, change is going to happen. So it's a matter of, do you want to let it happen to you, or do you want to direct it in the right area? And so being purposeful about pursuing exactly what we know is needed from there. I really think the community was able to embrace it because it was a team effort. It wasn't just a matter of one person or one specific business or something like that, but really incorporating everyone together to say, what are the weaknesses? Where are the strengths? Let's capitalize on our strengths, but let's also look at our weaknesses and make the changes we need to legislatively, and then pursue what we need to do business-wise to make sure the city of Hanahan has what it needs now and moving forward.
Thank you, Mayor Rainwater. Next, we'll have Supervisor Cribb. Supervisor, you have a unique vantage point, unlike the mayors, in that you have worked your way through municipal government and have held various roles in your career. How does that perspective help you in your administration of the county and the direction you are going?
Yeah, I definitely think it's impactful. I actually started off my career as an educator at North Charleston High School for 3 years, and then went to the town of Mount Pleasant for 15 years in the Parks and Rec department. They tell you, you don't mess with people's money or their kids, and I spent 15 years doing both. Then I went to the city of Hanahan for 10 years, and now I've been at the county for 2. And I've learned at the county level, your hair turns gray a lot faster than any other stage I've been at in my career. but really, we have a great regional concept. It helps you keep in mind all stakeholders. Everything we do matters. When a project comes into our county, I went on a tour of Boeing a little while back, and at the end of the tour, the Boeing executive informed me that over half of their employees lived in Berkeley County. That's pretty impactful. So we're very strategic about economic development and where we bring industry to, and everybody has touched on it. We're never going to be able to widen I-26 enough for all the cars that are coming. So if we have jobs and doctors' offices and commercial and retail and stuff closer to where people live and where people work, that's really the answer to our future. Whenever we're talking about doing new things, I think about the school district. I think about a lot of times we're making decisions that are going to impact them tremendously. And how do we engage the school district to get their input? When I first became supervisor, I went to a conference and all 46 counties were represented either by an administrator or a supervisor. And the facilitator said, raise your hand if you get along with your local school district. And like 5 hands went up. We're very blessed in our region to where I know certainly in Berkeley County to where we get along very well with our school district and we collaborate very well with our school district. It truly matters. The last thing I want to say is coming through local government. When I was in the town of Mount Pleasant, I'm a pretty competitive guy. And one day somebody showed me the wage and comp scale when I was the last grade, lowest paid person you can possibly be in the town. So that's where I started. And then started to work my way up. So our staff, I say it all the time. We got amazing people at the county, people drawn to public service, people that want to help. We've got great public servants throughout the region, not just panel, but actually the people that work with us that help get this stuff done. And what we do and how we give our employees and our staff and our public servants what they need to get things done. And I think about being at each different level of the process and being appreciative of the places that I've worked and the resources that we've been given to help do our job. So when you find yourself in the top 1% in growth and planning every year, we break records every month in Berkeley County. When COVID hit, our deeds office, planning office, building office, we've done nothing but break records every month since then. So what I've got to do is sit back and go, if we're taking in 2,000 more permits than we took in last year at budget time, do I have the same amount of planners that I had last year? Do I have the same amount of engineers? Do I have the same amount of water and sewer techs? So what we've got to do is be responsive of what's going on, be keenly aware of what's going on, and make sure that our staffs that are executing all of our thoughts and plans, make sure they have what they need to be able to take care of the public.
Thank you, Supervisor Cribb. Mayor Teklenberg, we want to make sure you make your next commitment, and we'll get you out with one last question. Housing affordability is a major issue in the region and one that the city has been vocal on. How does the City of Charleston's new comprehensive plan address housing affordability and availability?
Well, thank you. And before I leave, I did want to share that we have not submitted our updated comprehensive plan yet, that the state allowed all of us to, because of COVID, to take a little more time. And in public engagement, of course, was very different over the last year. So we are still taking public comments. And if anybody would like to see any of the information that we've gathered so far, or to make any recommendations to the City of Charleston, please go to charlestoncityplan.com, charlestoncityplan.com. A bunch of information, and again, we seek everyone's comments and suggestions for our future. Now, specifically to affordable housing, that's the other area that we drilled down on with our comprehensive plan, and came up with this chart of affordable housing needed citywide by 2030 to eliminate what we're calling the affordability gap. I think the whole region is experiencing an affordability crisis of sorts. As you say, people are moving here. Demand is exceeding the supply. I know the real estate market is doing well despite COVID, people are moving here. They found out they can work at home, and it driving prices up even more in our region, and that works against all these things that we're talking about of having folks living close to where they work, particularly downtown in the city of Charleston. So if we've come up with these target number of units for different parts of our city to focus on growth that is affordable within what we call 120% of the AMI, which is the average median income. We base it on Charleston County mostly, but Berkeley County has a very similar number. How do we get there? We get there by investing some of our own funds. We've created some fees for that are dedicated to developing affordable housing. We partner with both nonprofit and for-profit development partners who are building affordable housing. We're cutting red tape to make it easier to get approvals. We're not making them go through exactly the same processes as normal development opportunities if they're a bona fide affordable product. And so we recognize the importance of adding affordability in the city of Charleston, and are getting very specific in our comprehensive plan about where we want to see that happen, in addition to being on high ground as well. And those are kind of the two main focuses of our revised comprehensive plan, I believe, will be affordability and making sure we're building in the smart, right places for our future.
Thank you, Mayor
Thanks again
Teklenberg.
for having me.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the affordable housing in their area and the availability?
Well, North Charleston still has a good amount of areas that has affordable housing, although we have seen those prices starting to escalate. And so we're looking at how do we manage that. Chicora being an area, Dorchester Terrace, Dorchester Wayland. We actually saw a house recently sell in Dorchester Terrace for $250,000. So we're seeing that influx of people enhancing values in there. So it's really a challenge for us. That's why we're building this new facility and this new housing for home ownership. That would be I think Housing Authority told me that on a 3-bedroom house, they will allocate up to $975 per month. And so we now have units that are going to be built that would qualify for the purchase a home for the same amount they can get from the Housing Authority to rent a home. And so that's going to be some challenges keeping it down. Chicora is going to be a challenge. Right now, we have a lot of non-home ownership in that area. So we're working with people like Metanoia, who's doing some projects in there, how we can create more home ownership back into that community. It has good housing stock. A lot of it needs to be updated and renovated. We're seeing Reynolds Avenue investments going back in there now. It will become basically what happened to us in the old village. And so the challenges are there, but we just have to make sure that we can provide what I classify as workforce housing for the people who are working in the area and living in the area, and make sure that it is affordable. We cannot price people out of living in our community. We end up like some areas, island areas, that people have to travel 30 miles to get to work because there's no place they can afford to live in those areas. And so it's a challenge. And I think all of us sort of have to work together because I know a good many of the city of Charleston's housing vouchers are used in North Charleston. And we have our vouchers in there as well. But we have to make sure that we are creating and maintaining housing that is affordable for the workforce people. the city's trying to enhance how much people can afford more. There's not any full-time employee in the city that starts now for less than $15 an hour. We've asked businesses to do it. We've asked industries coming in to do it. And if we don't set the example, I don't think we can ask them to do it. So that took us a 4-year cycle to reach that point. But I can tell you our turnover rate is less. The quality of people in the entry-level jobs has improved. So it's a challenge that I think we as government have to meet the standard of what we're asking other people to do, so that we can have people that can afford to live within our communities, that work within our communities.
Thank you, Mayor Summey. Anyone else? Well, we have one last question. What have you learned during the comprehensive plan process that you did not know about or were not prepared for? Let's start with Supervisor Cribb.
Thank you. I've been a part of a lot of comprehensive plans over the years, and they're extremely important. There's that saying, it's not just a book on a shelf that you got to fulfill a statutory requirement for. It's a very important document. So it's not really, this year, it was unique. It wasn't what I learned from the comprehensive process. It was during COVID, and such an important thing to do. How can we get the feedback we need? It's going to create a guiding document for 10 years during a pandemic. So our staff, our planning staff, and working with the BCD COG and Catherine Basher and their excellent planners, they predicted this, and they came up with a great plan of how can we get good feedback during COVID. So we did virtual meetings that were very well attended. It's not something that's been done in the past, but even without a pandemic in the future, it's probably something that we'll continue to do. We still had the in-person meetings, but we did it in a COVID-friendly way and in small groups and rotated them through. And we actually had a lot of folks come to the in-person meetings. We got over 1,100 surveys in. Every time I went to a community, I'd bring a box of t-shirts with me that had the logo that's behind me on the back. And I said, hey, if you'd fill out a survey for our comprehensive plan, you get a t-shirt. So we were doing some things that we haven't done in the past to try to get feedback. And then we had something we put up, we referred to it as front porch, to where we actually put the PowerPoint out there, and different community groups could get together, neighborhoods could get together and actually go through the PowerPoint and do their own project and give us feedback. I know that the Conservation League actually did a really good job of using that and giving us feedback. And then we even had requests for mini workshops, to where Councilman Pinckney and Cross actually was given the material, and he had 30 or 40 attendees that we were able to get some great feedback for. And even a community in Berkeley County as small as Lebanon, a proud community, an awesome community, they had over 100 attendees. So we did some unique things this time that were COVID driven that we will not bail on after the pandemic. So we're proud of the engagement and the responses we've been able to get, and the concern of putting together a document without that valued public feedback, we were able to negate it.
Thank you, Supervisor Cribb. Next, Mayor Summey.
Well, I honestly think that the pandemic that we've been under has created more involvement. People had more time on their hands that they could honestly engage and get involved in the planning that we have for the future. So I think in some ways, the pandemic has helped us get people more concerned about where they live, what's surrounding them, and where they're going for the future. So our engagement has been great. Our staff has done a good job engaging our citizens in our planning process. So we're excited about where we're headed and getting the neighborhoods engaged in it.
Thank you, Mayor Summey. Next, Mayor Rainwater.
Well, I have to admit, I have my first one coming up. I have not been a part of the comprehensive plan yet. I'm the newbie here, so I'm taking lots of notes and appreciate what's been shared. But I do plan on applying principles that I know work well. The number one thing would definitely be to listen. and then to take that information that I've acquired and be purposeful in it. And I know our council and our staff, they've been through this process, and I'm sure they'll be leaders in it. But one thing I think is really important, I loved what Supervisor Cribb and Mayor Summey shared, because we have to stay relevant and effective as government. I feel like occasionally we kind of lag a little behind, and business is very purposeful about staying relevant, being ahead of the game, not lagging behind. And so I remember when we had talked about doing some redevelopment in our downtown area, and we were talking about having a charrette, I just really wanted it to look different. And this was right before COVID. We never wound up doing it, but I said, I would love to do like a little VIP event where we invite specific people that we would like to reinvest in our downtown area and do a little walking tour of the downtown to see what's available. When we have the shred, I would love to see food trucks or jump castles where families who are normally running around or maybe feel like they're not welcome there unless they're in a suit. I'd like to make it a welcome place where it's everyone in the community is invited, where their thoughts are valued, where they're implemented. And then once that comprehensive plan is there, I know there is a point for reevaluation, but not just waiting for these specific markers of it's been 5 years, it's been 10 years, but it being in a regular state of reevaluating is what we have put out still working? Is there anything we need to tweak? And really just making sure that the best plan is in place and a consistent living document to make sure that it stays that way.
Thank you, Mayor Rainwater. Mayor Haney?
Yes, thank you very much. A couple of things. If you look at the numbers and the statistics, we had more citizen input at our charrettes and by other means for this comprehensive plan than any time in the history of Mount Pleasant. And if you look at the numbers where those opinions and preferences were broken down, I won't say surprise, but the affirmation and the very pleasant affirmation to us was that the vision for what makes Mount Pleasant special and what we want to preserve was consistent across our citizenry, including, if you have just moved here and you live up in Carolina Park, which, has a planned development agreement, you could have a very different vision and view of the town of Mount Pleasant than somebody who's lived in old Mount Pleasant or the old village for the past 30 years. And going into this, I was concerned that there would be different visions of the town of Mount Pleasant, but that did not come out that way. And it came out with a unified vision to preserve and protect the things that make Mount Pleasant special and make it desirable. And that's what got built into our comprehensive plan. And I'm very, very relieved and very proud of that as well.
Thank you, Mayor Haney. Mayor Habib?
This process has been very interesting to me because what it's taught me is several things. Is we need to do in the city of Goose Creek a better job of educating folks on what municipal government does and is, and I found that, but there's a juxtaposition between what a lot of folks want to see and what is and not that that's not hugely important, but the realities of managing a municipality the size of Goose Creek or managing or working and participating in its growth. Housing options during our feedback process was not a concern at all of the people who responded to our comprehensive plan. A lot of people live within their own neighborhood and care about things that affect just them, and they don't recognize necessarily that the opportunity for other folks to live and work and play within the community is a great impact on our region. So I feel like we've got to spend some time doing some education. I realized during this that while Goose Creek is quite frankly an affluent city, folks don't necessarily realize the level of income that's here, but we have an almost 10%, just under 10% of our citizens fall under the poverty level. And so if we don't consider housing and where folks are going to live, then we're missing our opportunity to serve the entirety of our city. We've got a plan for work. We have a plan for places where people can go to work, places where people can lift up their own lives, opportunities to live, work, and play if you can live here. I can tell you as a person who is in the middle of building a new house, that the cost of that house rose exponentially from the beginning to where we are now. And if we don't at least recognize that not only people can't necessarily live, as Mayor Summey said, on the barrier islands or in downtown Charleston or in North Charleston, if we get to where folks can't afford to live in Goose Creek and Somerville, how much further out are we going to have to go? How much more traffic are we all going to have to deal with? As Supervisor Cribb mentioned, put jobs where people are, put people where jobs are. Again, we have to really give consideration to where everyone is going to live. And that has to come out of our comprehensive plan here. And it's something that we will continue to work on.
Thank you, Mayor Habib. I would like to open the floor for any closing comments. Okay,
Just like to thank you for putting this together.
thank you. We want to thank you for attending the first session, and we want to thank everyone who participated in the leadership panel. Coming up next, you will hear from John Hunt with MarketNSight on the missing middle. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Let me share my screen, see if we can get started.
John, if I can real quick, I
Sure.
apologize to interrupt you. I just want to get a chance to talk to everybody and let them know a little bit about you and
Thank you.
questions, answers. So Rusty Hughes, I'm the CTAR president for 2021. I appreciate everybody's participation today. Loved hearing from our mayors and supervisors, so appreciate them taking time to join us. John is the chief analyst and principal of MarketNSight with over 30 years experience in the housing industry. He with an emphasis, on qualitative and quantitative analysis, which has led to extremely accurate modeling and forecasting. MarketNSight provides market analysis for over 35 markets across the Southeast. With that, John, do want to remind everybody on the Zoom that we will be taking questions. So you please feel free to put them in the question and answer session, and Josh Dix will help facilitate that. Also, you can use the raise your hand feature. So again, we want this to be interactive. And John, thank you for being here today, and you can take it away.
Thank you, Rusty. And it is great to be with you virtually. Can't wait to be back to your beautiful city in person, which I hope will be soon. We are in 35 cities, as Rusty mentioned, or actually over 35 cities. And before the pandemic, we were traveling, speaking 3 or 4 times a week in all of these cities. And then it just stopped about this time last year, as a matter of fact. So miss being with people, although we figured out how to do it. My travel budget dropped 90%. That's not a bad thing, but I'm ready to start getting back out again. Because when we go to these cities, we learn so much from meeting with our customers, prospects, and local folks in the market about the challenges they face. And I'm going to share some of that today. So before we dive into the topic at hand, which is kind of about workforce housing, affordability, missing middle, all those topics, we cannot do this without mentioning how housing has performed shockingly in this 100-year pandemic. And so I want to take you up to just before the pandemic and then through the pandemic and give you a quick market update. And we'll drill down on Charleston. But what if there was no pandemic? A lot of people thought we were heading for a recession anyway. We were at the 10-year mark of the expansion. We've never been longer than that in this country. A lot of people were nervous. And to add to that, we had a housing collapse in 2018, which everybody thought was the beginning of the end. So I want to talk about that. The truth is that expansions don't die of old age. They're murdered. Something has to happen to kill them off. The last 2 recessions were asset bubbles popping, the technology bubble and then the housing bubble, the most recent one in 2008 and 9. As we entered this 10-year point and past the 10-year point of this expansion, as a forecaster, we didn't see anything that meant imminent danger of a recession. However, a good forecaster always leaves himself an out. So let's look at what happened and brought us right up to the precipice of the pandemic, January 18 through February 20. We did have a housing decline nationally in 2018. It was not the cause of an overbuilding, an oversupply, or an asset bubble. It was a direct result of interest rates going from 4 to 4.8. And if any of you on this call bought a house in the early 80s and paid 17% interest, this sounds ridiculous to you, but going from 4 to 4.8, an 80 basis point increase in rates in 2018 caused demand. That blue line is pending sales. Pending sales are our leading indicator. They collapsed not just in Atlanta and Charlotte, but in Charleston, but also all over the country. And it shows how very price sensitive this market is. And there's a hard ceiling on price. We are spoiled to these low rates. And when we went up to 4.8, the market said, forget it. Now, the Fed, in my opinion, and made a great move, chose not to raise rates in 2019. They actually started cutting rates. The effect of that was that we saw an 80 basis point drop in rates by the time we got to May of 19. It's not a surprise that as that happened, demand flooded back into the market. There's an absolute inverse relationship between an increase in rates and a decline in housing demand, and the opposite is also true. So as we recovered in May and went positive, we were very strong up through February as rates continue to drop another 50 basis points. So as we entered the beginning of the pandemic, we were in really, really good shape. Not only was there high demand, closings, which always lag pendings, because you sign a contract first and then you close 30, 60, 90 days later, had caught up with pendings, and permits had also caught up because they also lag. So as we entered the pandemic, we were at a really good place. Job growth was booming, outpacing forecast. We had very low inventory and high demand. But there was a pandemic. Now, what I've said in my forecast as my out is, I think we'll be fine. Now, if a plane flies into a building like 9/11, all bets are off. And I've had customers that have reminded me that every forecast I give, I say that, and that's my out. Well, the pandemic was not a plane flying into a building, 9/11, but the effect was absolutely the same. It was a gut punch from nowhere, from outside our country and industry. The industry had nothing to do with it, and yet it hit us. And the effect was absolutely breathtaking. I've never seen anything like this. So if you take that same chart and reveal what happened through May, so February, March, April, May was an absolute collapse of all metrics across the country because we shut the country down on purpose. This was a recession by design, in effect. And the effect was tantamount to a plane flying into a building. But what I want to mention is this little uptick from April to May in the pending sales. That was astounding. So we as a company decided to move to weekly reporting. We did it out of fear because we had no clue what was going to happen. We might be out of business in 6 months, but we wanted to give our customers a heads up on the trends as quickly as possible. And we always report monthly, but we decided to do weekly. I will tell you, it's probably one of the best business decisions we ever made. I'll show you what happened and the surprise that everybody saw as we came out of this. And I'll do this for both Atlanta and Charleston. So our weekly reporting for new and resale pending sales took a sharp dive. So in this chart, you've got COVID cases on the left and pending sales trend on the right. New is blue and resale is green. And you want to be above zero. By the time we got to the first week in April, the steepness of that trend line was so shocking to me that we went out on a limb and said, Katie, bar the door,
batten down the hatches. We're going to be down 50 to 55% because that line was going down at an increasing rate. And we felt like the more COVID cases we saw, the worse housing would perform. I think that's natural to think that. So we had very ominous predictions, probably more negative than anybody, in our April 14th newsletter. The beauty of doing weekly updates is what happened in the second week of April. That unexpectedly, we saw a turnaround, especially in new construction, but also in resale. And that came even as we had a new high in COVID cases. And then we said, you know, a week doesn't make a trend, so let's wait and see what happens. The next week, it continued to improve. That's the classic V beginning to form, even as we had another high in COVID cases, which isn't supposed to happen. And we felt comfortable coming out, and we were probably the first in the country to call a bottom in our April 21st newsletter. And we were right, thank goodness. Have no way to explain it, especially at that time. But let's play this out. So what happened? COVID cases go up, housing goes down. That's what happened initially, but it didn't happen as we continued because we thought we'd seen a lot of COVID cases through the middle of April. Boy, were we wrong, because we all went out and got stupid on Memorial Day and 4th of July weekend, and we saw COVID cases absolutely explode. So I'll let this play. Housing goes up, resale and new up at a larger rate. Even as we had that big wave, that big second wave, we thought we would see some moderation. That shocked us, by the way, that we're seeing housing go up as COVID goes up. It's not supposed to happen. We did begin to see some moderation as we entered the first week of November. Does anybody know what happened in the first week of November? We had an election, and that's not a coincidence. I deal with a lot of economists who are way smarter than me. They've done a lot of research on the effect of elections on investment, especially. And they will tell you that before most elections, investment dries up. Housing is an investment. And then as soon as the election is over, regardless of the outcome, investment tends to flow back in the market. You know at least what the rules are, even if the outcome is not what you wanted. And we saw that in housing as well. So after that first week in November of hitting a low point, we saw people begin to get back in the market. You can see where we are now. So we've been positive. So the shelter in place seems to have been the biggest effect on the decline in housing, not the number of COVID cases. And thankfully, as you know, we're seeing COVID cases drop dramatically. We hope that continues. So new construction in Atlanta is up 32% since we went positive. Resale's up 20. Let me show you the same thing for Charleston. It's very similar. You bottomed a little bit later in the second week of April, and then you went positive and stayed positive. This is new in resale, even as COVID cases exploded. Lots of variation. When you look at data weekly, there's a lot of fluctuation because you look at it in such a granular method, but you're fluctuating at a very high rate. So the fact that we were positive during most of these I call it the second, third wave, is pretty amazing. So housing is one of the bright spots. Why? I think people will be thinking about this and writing books about it for years to come. But your new construction is up 48% on average since you went positive, and resale is up 37%. This is pending sales. Lots of demand. So let's talk about some things that have been easy to say about how the pandemic has changed how we live and think and look for homes, and put a litmus test to them. One of them is this question. We asked this question to 900 builders that we had in a meeting in December. Is the pandemic causing people to flee the inner cities en masse and move to the suburbs? It's very easy to say that. It kind of makes sense to say it, but does the data back it up? Because my audience has been watching the news, 60% of them agreed with that. 40% of those 900 builders did not. And if you read the headlines, stick a fork in the inner cities, they're done. People are fleeing density. moving to lower density because of the pandemic. I'm going to submit to you and prove to you that that's not true. The suburban shift is what they're calling this, is not a pandemic issue. This started back in 2013, and I'll tell you why, and I'll show you. It started because we ran out of cheap bank-owned lots for the most part in this country in 2013 and 14, forcing us to move further out to keep the same price point, because the cheap lots allowed us to build in close-in areas at a lower price. So I'm going to show you this for several cities. It happened everywhere. So we're looking at the core of Atlanta, the 6 core counties in the red, and the rest of the counties that we track in the blue. You can see that the red bar began to drop back in 13 and 14 because we ran out of cheap lots, forcing people to move further out for price, not a pandemic. You can see that really we haven't seen this trend change dramatically even during the pandemic. It's a price-driven thing, not a pandemic thing. People still love to be in town. They just can't afford to anymore because their incomes have been static. Same thing in Greenville, Spartanburg. And then we'll look at Charleston. You've got Berkeley County has taken the lion's share as Charleston has declined. That's the blue bar in the middle. And we've moved some to Dorchester too. But this is a natural occurrence in terms of price. And some people get it. The stories about people fleeing the cities is nonsense. Zillow has data to back this up. They don't see any change in where people are looking at all. And the truth is, if you dig into the data, it's the suburban housing markets haven't strengthened disproportionately compared to urban markets. This is a case where a rising tide has lifted all boats. Everybody's doing better. So it's false to say that people are fleeing the city because of the pandemic. And I'm going to prove that in the data. These are pending sales changes year to year. I'll show you in-town Atlanta and in-town Charleston. This is Virginia Highlands, very desirable place. We did see a dip during the government shutdown, like we saw everywhere. And then for the most part, pending sales have been radically up. I'm talking about 40 and 50% up. These are people fleeing in town. These are people moving in town. This is resale too. Kirkwood, very popular place. The downturn, government shutdown affected it as well. Since then, it's been up big. So let's look at some in-town zip codes in Charleston. This is zip code 29401. Same thing. Downturn, government shutdown, explosion. Everybody's doing better. People aren't fleeing the cities. Zip code 29403. 1 month negative. That's it. 29405. You can see the same trend. So I think what I'm getting at is you would see a lot of excess housing inventory in those markets if people were trying to sell and leave. And the months of supply is almost non-existent. We're having to count months of supply in hours, not days and months today. And you all know that as realtors, you're seeing that happen. So let's drill down on Charleston, see the effect of the pandemic on price points, and then why we need to consider how to change what we do in order to allow people to live and work in our neighborhoods. So let's look at Charleston new construction by price point. This is how the pandemic affected price points, and you're going to see something interesting here. First of all, our chief economist at NAHB, Robert Dietz, has said, and I agree with him, that anything under 300 grand today is considered entry level. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. It is today. And that's where you're going to see growth. The markets that are going to grow are ones where builders can add to that entry level product 300 grand. Now that $300,000 product can take any shape, could take any square footage. It can look like anything, which we're about to show you, but the price point is critical, 300 and low. Let's look at how these price points were affected in Charleston. So we'll look at April, which was the government shutdown, the worst part of the effect of the pandemic. We're going to look at price points 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 1 million, and over $1 million. So there's the month of April. Yes, the higher price points did take a bigger hit, just like active adult. because a lot of those folks are tied to 401ks and the stock market and their portfolios. And, your 401k dropped to a 101k and you stopped looking for houses and your portfolio took a hit. So in the 7 to over million, you also stopped. Interesting though, that the 200 to 300 price point never went negative, was very positive because people weren't tied to portfolios and 401ks as much. Now, what happens as we go forward, I think is critical, because you're going to see that 200 to 300 perform well and then begin to disappear. So every price point turned around after April, but then you're going to see, as you enter the months leading up to December, 200 to 300 begin to go negative. Now, is that because nobody wants to buy a house under 300 in Charleston? No, it's because they don't exist anymore. And I'll show you why in a minute. So this is the problem. We're losing that entry level because prices are up so high and there's no inventory. So this is price change for new and resale. And this is what we're watching and keeping an eye on. This is new construction price increase or decrease. Obviously, we took a big hit in terms of year-to-year price change. We were down 16% in April. We've worked our way back up to double digits, actually. By December, new homes are up 15%. Wait till you see resale, which is 80% of the demand. Boom. This is unprecedented, and I would tell you, I think unsustainable. You can't have prices be up 25 to 35% on an ongoing basis. People's incomes will not allow it. But this is what the effect of lack of inventory is having on our market. And so the answer is to add more inventory. Well, that's not easy at all. We'll talk about that too. So what are Charleston's hottest markets in terms of new home sales? We talk about that in terms of school districts, because school district tends to be the driving factor. It's about location, location, location. So let's look at and this is all the Charleston MSA. So you can see varying counties in here. This is based on new home sales, #1 high school districts. And I'll just pop this up so you can see them all. Give you the top 15 in the market based on new construction home sales. Now remember, what Robert Dietz said is those communities that can add entry-level product are going to grow. How many of those school systems fit that definition? Not many. It's over half don't. So those are around 300 grand to less, and then the rest are over that. And that's a function of lack of supply and very low interest rates. It's very difficult for us to add inventory in those lower price points with all the barriers and constraints that we have today. One of the first things that we do to address that price increase is we go to a higher density. You go from detached to townhomes. We've done that, but I think it's not far enough. We're seeing that happen even in a pandemic. So I'll ask this question: is density dead because of the pandemic? A lot of the news articles would have you believe that. No. Primary, secondary, and tertiary markets in our footprint have all seen density increase, not decrease. So townhomes is the next step, detached to townhome. We've seen townhomes, even in a pandemic, increase dramatically. Greenville, dramatically. Chattanooga, a tertiary, third market, dramatically. Charleston, dramatically. So we are seeing builders and communities attempt to address the price increase by going to a higher density, therefore lowering the price. And I think today's demographics lend themselves to that more than they ever have in the recent history of our country. And here's why. We're looking at who's buying homes today. Well, let me say that again. You're looking at the consumer groups today as defined in terms of a barbell. So today, the biggest consumer group is on the lower side of this barbell, the millennials. They just took over that from whom? The active adult empty nesters. This is today's market. The two big 800-pound gorillas are on either end of the barbell. The millennials are the biggest consumer group now, followed by the active adult buyers. This is a different world than it was 15 or 20 years ago, when those baby boomers had kids and there was a bulge in the middle. So it didn't look like a barbell 20 years ago, because the baby boomers were the 45, 40, 35-year-olds who had kids, needed a single family, 3,000 square foot house in a good school district. The world has changed. And a lot of these two demographics, by the way, have a lot in common. So you got the 50-year-old just kicked his last kid out of the house on the upper end of the barbell. Every night's a party. You know, they like to party just as much, if not more, than the millennials, dual income, single income, no kids. They both love craft breweries with exposed brick, and they don't want to live in 3,000 square feet. And they're the two biggest consumer groups in the country. So the other thing is, 55 isn't what it used to be. So if you look at what we look like at 55 today, there's an example. This is Tom Cruise at 55 filming Mission Impossible. So what did 50 used to look like? It looked like this. There's Wilford Brimley at age 50 when he recorded and filmed Cocoon. So it's a different world today. Tom Cruise can hang from a cliff by his bare fists, and he can also run up and down the stairs in a townhome. And he doesn't want to be put out to pasture until he's maybe 65. So these two consumer groups are looking for essentially the same kind of space. By the way, the first-time buyers are back engaged. They weren't for a very long time. They're now 43% of all new home sales. It took years for that to happen because of the downturn, but they're back with a vengeance. And so when you look at what these two demographic groups have in common, it's the location that's the amenity, not what you're living in necessarily. And we'll talk about that. So can we go smaller than towns? We've already made that step from a detached to a townhome in some places. We're getting a lot of pushback on townhomes in some of our locations and localities. But can we go smaller than towns? I think we can. I think we're going to have to. I think the market demands it, but we're going to have to build stuff we've never built before or haven't built in maybe 100 years. We have to innovate. And we all know what happens when you don't innovate. You die. And all you got to do is look at the retail and restaurant industry and see what's happening. We have witnessed, and this is before the pandemic, retail was already on its deathbed before the pandemic. They're now done. Stick a fork in it. Who caused this? Mainly, which of the big demographic groups brought retail in this country to its knees? I would submit to you, it's the millennials. Dang millennials. I have kids that order everything from toilet paper to toothbrush, toothpaste, and have it delivered to their house. I would never have thought about doing that. That's the world we live in. The pandemic has accelerated this. As you read these headlines every day, stores going out of business, lots of strip centers going out of business. We used to have a term VDL back in 2009, vacant developed lots that were foreclosed on. Now we have a term VDR, vacant developed retail. You know, it's rampant everywhere. I think it's a great opportunity to be redeveloped into housing or other things. We're starting to see some innovation in that regard. The mall meltdown continues. They're done. Stick a fork in them. I know that the Epic Center, the Old West Ashley Citadel Mall, has been talked about in terms of putting housing there. It's not going to be easy to do. I know it's still being pushed back with some studies and things like that. But I think it's a great idea, and I think it's going to help us in terms of alleviating some of the supply issues. But the apartment industry has shown us the way here if we're willing to listen. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We all thought the apartments were going to collapse under their own weight starting in 2015, as we as an industry, the new home industry, predicted that the millennials would get tired of paying rent as it escalated, and as they have in the past, move to the suburbs and buy our cheap houses on cheap lots, which we had back then. We were wrong. The millennials stayed in those apartments as rates increased and showed us that we live differently today. They get it and we don't. Now, I think the shift is starting to happen for millennials, but it's 5 or 6 years later than we thought it was. But let's look at what this teaches us in terms of how people want to live today. It's not the way people wanted to live 15 or 20 years ago. Look at what they're paying and the square footage they're paying for. I'm going to give you national and local examples, and we're going to use the smallest square footage space that these apartments offer, usually around 400 to 500 square feet. And I'm going to show you what they're paying for that. You're going to die. This is in Houston. By the way, how big is 500 square feet? It's a little bit bigger than your 2-car garage at your house. That's all this is. And also, by the way, what's another term for a 500 square foot residence? Tiny home. It's just you stack them on top of each other. That's what this is. So the tiny home movement's here. It's just they're stacked on top of each other and not on wheels. But they're paying $1,428 a month for 568 square feet. Why? Because their amenity is outside their 569 square feet. The walkability, the desirability of that walkability is there. And what I want you to see is you're paying the same rate for the same square footage. It doesn't matter what city you're in. So the apartment industry knows this. That's how they can go make capital all day. They know they can build 500 square foot apartment and sell it for $1,605, $14 to $1,605, Dallas. Let's look at Atlanta, $1,500 for 598 square feet. This seems ridiculous. Phoenix, the 4 biggest new home markets in the country. Let's go to smaller markets. Greenville, beautiful downtown area. They've done a fabulous job, as you know. $1,500 for 490 square feet. Savannah, same thing. Oh, where's Charleston? There we go. Charleston, same thing. What is this telling us? People are willing to stay in smaller square footage spaces than they ever have been before in order to be in those walkable situations. And did the pandemic change that? Somewhat, and we'll talk about that. This study is fascinating, and I think it's going to be proved wrong as we see millennials leaving apartments now. But what it said is, if you take the track record in the last 6 or 7 years, when Gen Z, now who's Gen Z? Gen Z are the kids still in your house that you're trying to get out. That's Gen Z. But when they get out of your house, this study said that they would spend $1,700 a month for 11 years before they bought. That's unbelievable. That, by the way, at today's interest rates with 10% down on a 30-year mortgage would buy you a $420,000 house, townhome, condo, or tiny home. And what's interesting is I think just since the pandemic, the millennials are beginning to get this and then move. That's what we're seeing. I think it's part of why we're seeing a big boom in housing. So can we sell that square footage to them? They've been living in 5, 6, 8, 900 square feet. Can we sell it to them instead of them renting it? Don't we all know there are benefits to people owning instead of renting? Yes, and we already are. Let me show you some examples of that. This is a stacked flat in Nashville. A stacked flat is different than a condo. Stacked flats stick built on the stories above the first floor, so it's a lot cheaper to build. But this is 650 square feet, sold in Nashville for under 200 grand. That's like an apartment. Why did people buy it? That's $308 a square foot, by the way, very high. And the mortgage is $820 a month. Why did they move here? Because across the street at the Broadstone Gulch Apartments, for that same square footage, you were paying $1,700 a month rent. So can we sell this to them? Yes, it is cheaper to own than it is to rent. And I think they're just finding this out. But we've got to build this kind of product for them. This is a product called a mansion apartment. We'll talk about those. This looks like a kind of a master, a mansion. It's got 8 units in it. And it's 970 square feet, sells for mid threes, $361 a square foot. The mortgage is $1,435. Across the street, literally, you're paying $2,000 a month for the same square footage. Founder Station. And I'm going to give you a lot of examples of this just so you can take some with you. This is Birmingham. This is a company that's gone to the extreme, and they're a traditional developer. They're known for developing massive golf club communities in traditional areas with traditional single family people. They've seen the writing on the wall in Birmingham. They're going into downtown Birmingham, refurbing old buildings, which everybody loves with the exposed brick. But here's what they're doing. By the way, that's me touring this 235 square foot unit. Yes, that's a small hotel room. They sold them for 80 grand. Could not sell them fast enough. And I'm telling you, the little lady right there with the hard hat on is standing in front of the Murphy bed that falls out. This is the extent of this little apartment. So that's the extreme, but I think its time has come. $340 a square foot. Price per square foot is not as important to these buyers as the price. Talk about that later. How about ADUs? Term I hadn't heard of till 3 years ago. Accessory dwelling unit. This is one in Inman Park in Atlanta. Very cute. Are you kidding me? It's 645 square feet. It sold for 188 grand. Down the street, there's an apartment. Same square footage is costing you 1758. The mortgage on that is 771. Just some examples. Another one we'll talk about is ADUs and duplexes on the same city lot. Typical city lots are 50 by 150. This is a 50 by 138 city lot. It was left over. It's near the zoo in Atlanta. Instead of putting one house on it and making it a very expensive one house, this developer and builder decided to put a duplex in the front and an ADU in the back, and sold the ADU in the 160s and the duplexes in the low 2s. So I like that. It's density and it's thinking outside the box. I've never liked the tiny home shows. I've never liked tiny homes. You put wheels on them and it makes me want to throw up, but their time has come. And we're seeing changes in regulations to allow them to be built and separately and sold separately. It's not just tiny homes though. It's anything less than 2,000 square feet. And I don't care what it is. It can come in the form of many, many products. The market demands it today. And it's because our zoning is based on the demographic makeup of the world 15 to 20 years ago. We've had a recession for 10 years, trying to get out of it, and things have changed. We haven't really changed our zoning. What do I mean by that? If you look at the two biggest consumer groups, again, 20 years ago, the active adult buyers were in the middle, needing single family detached homes in good school districts. Now they don't have kids. The smallest demographic group is this traditional school-driven buyer. The two bulges on the top and bottom, you've got the millennials are getting out of their 700-800 square foot apartment. They don't want 3,000 square feet. They're not going to have kids for a while. They're looking for 12, 14, 1,500 square feet. The guys on the top want to sell their 3,000 square foot home. And by the way, we need them to sell that because we need the inventory, but they don't have anything to move into. And they're looking for something at 16, 18, 2,000 square feet that's in walkable areas, yard main secluded. So the two biggest consumer groups in the country are converging in the middle in terms of square footage. Here's our problem. The middle is missing. Like that tie-in, missing middle. It's the square footage. So missing middle housing. Let me share this with you. This was a radical change in our life, company life, the focus of our company. It happened in 2018 in Greenville. I attended and spoke at a housing forum. I was already encouraging our customers to build smaller square footage just to get the price down. I had no clue that there was a whole movement built on this. This was a forum that is maybe like your forum today. A lot of stakeholders. Karen Perlek of Opticos was the lead speaker. I had never heard of her. She introduced me to the term missing middle. I'm very old. I've been in this industry 31 years. I thought I knew everything. You're never too old to learn. She blew me away. Karen and her husband are the foremost experts on missing middle, husband Dan. You may have talked to them, you may have seen them. She blew my mind in this meeting. And I'll tell you why. Let's talk about the missing middle. The missing middle is duplexes, fourplexes, bungalow courts, mansion apartments, no bigger than a large house. And you can find them in most walkable pre-1940s neighborhoods that we all love and think are very charming and seek to be in. But we don't build that anymore. A lot of walkability, a lot of different choices serving these people. And if you look at this graphic, our zoning today is so polarized. It's either all single family, maybe I'll give you a townhome here and there, and then there's nothing until you get to apartments. Why do we do that? It's single family and apartments, and there's nothing in the middle. All that cool stuff that we used to build in this country 100 years ago, duplexes, triplexes, courtyards apartments, bungalow, townhouse, multiplex, live, work, we just skip over that. Why? Let me give you an example of missing middle. You can go to any city and find these areas. This happens to be Grant Park in Atlanta. There's a nice Craftsman, probably built in the 30s or 40s. It's a single family house, walkable neighborhood. It's right next to what looks like a single family house. This is the house next door, but you'll notice it has 2 doors. So it looks like a single family house, but it's a duplex, or it could be a quad, or it could be an eightplex. This mixture of densities used to be how we live. Like the doctor lives in the single family. Maybe the person that teaches his children lives in the duplex next door. What's wrong with that? Nothing. The problem is it's illegal to do this in most cities today. Our zoning won't allow it. You have to ask yourself why. Well, we don't zone anymore that way. And I'll be blunt and honest with you, because our great-great-grandparents were racist and bigots. There's no other way to explain it. But don't trust me. Let me tell you about it, and you go check the facts. In the 1920s, we started coming up with zoning codes. The guys who did it were outspoken segregationists. It was looked at as a method to circumvent the civil rights laws and keep certain neighborhoods white. So we put the single family detached on one side of town and the multifamily and the liquor stores on the other side of town. And that was government sanctioned socioeconomic bigotry. I'm 55 before I'm finding this out about my own country. Don't trust me. Richard Rothstein wrote the book, The Color of Law. He details how it was not the banks who came up with redlining in terms of mortgages. It was the FHA who started redlining and creating these districts and actually creating some of the slums that we have today. It's atrocity. You have to read it. And I think we need to deal with it. Beauty of missing middle is its density that doesn't look like density. And that's why it's becoming more and more talked about, not only in places you would think like the East Coast and the West Coast, but in the heartland. Some of this can look like a single family home, but have a density as high as 40 dwelling units per acre. This is from Karen and Dan Paralec's website. And here's one, and I'll show you actual photos. This is actually the first ground up missing middle community in the country. No, it's not in California. It's not in New York. It's in the heartland. It's in Prairie Queen, Nebraska. These homes look like mansions. They have multiple units inside. By the way, the other thing that missing middle does that you don't get with apartments is you don't have to socially distance in an elevator or a common hallway. The thing about missing middle is it creates high density that doesn't look like density, and you have your own entrance. So with the pandemic going on, that's a huge factor. So why are we doing this? And I had to focus on this because we go before city councils and county commissions. I have a lot of cities and counties that subscribe and are customers. And this is what I hear when we try to present something that makes sense density wise and price wise. This is the pushback we get. Not my backyard, NIMBY. No vinyl siding. We have a 2,000 square foot minimum. So I've asked some of my city councilmen who subscribe. Why do you have a 2,000 square foot minimum? They can't tell me. We have that you must have a garage. Why? We can't tell you. You must have a side entry garage. Why? I can't tell you. You must have a minimum of 2-car garages. Why? I can't tell you. The one that takes the case, though, is the Savannah and Richmond Hill Commissioner, and the NHB has a lawsuit ongoing against Bryan County, who said in a meeting, Richmond Hill is like a private club. If you want to live here, you're going to have to pay. That's a little exclusionary, don't you think? And by the way, Richmond Hill ain't all that. But when it boils down to it, all of these come to this: the fear that smaller homes, no garages, will bring values down. That is the bottom line. You get pressure from your constituency, and I think it's based in ignorance. One of your excellent mayors mentioned that we need education. I think this is a place where we need it. It's just not the fact. That's not how pricing works. So I want to give you some examples that you can take with you to show that this doesn't work this way. And we're going to talk about 2,000 square foot minimums. We're going to talk about garage, no garage. And then we're going to talk about, does that affect the price of your area? So I've worked on this. Please tell me if I do a good job. We got to rethink our 40-year-old ideas about new construction. It's time to innovate how we're doing. We're getting there. So can we build what they want where they want it? So I'm going to bring in regression. Don't be scared. These are just lines and dots. On the left, you've got price. On the bottom, you've got square footage. This is an in-town area of Atlanta. It's called Decatur. And it's a very desirable place to live, but it's in town. So the new construction is where it is, townhomes in the blue, detached in the red, because it's being forced there by the zoning laws. And it's the 2,000 square foot minimum. It's the 2-car garage minimum. And so you're building stuff that the zoning is forcing you to build. Now, there are 1,000 closings in this zip code, new and resale combined. You're looking at about 40 new home closings way up and to the right. So 2,500 square feet and 500 grand for a townhome. By the way, that same townhome in the suburbs would cost you half that. 700 grand for the detached and 3,500 square feet. And we're doing that because we're being forced to, because that's what people think they want. But I told you there were 1,000 closings in this zip code. There are 40 new construction and 960 resale. Where are all those resale closings occurring? Are you ready? Right there. 90% of the buyers are there, not here. We're forced to build that based on current zoning rules. But most of the people want to be here. Now, what are they buying? Those are very old resales. Those are 1930s, 40s resales where you park on the street maybe, and they've had to fix them up. But they're also less than 2,000 square feet. This is what people want. This is how people want to live. So if you calculate how to do this, we have a metric where new homes can't go more than 20% above resale in all of our cities and be successful. So you can see that line there is 20%. That's why the townhomes are settling right there. But what if you could build something down and to the left on this chart? What if your zoning allowed for you to compete with those much older resales with something brand new? And let's just wave a magic wand and do it. Right now, those townhomes are 550 or 500 grand, and they're 220 bucks a square foot. What the general public thinks is if you built something at 400 grand, your overall pricing would decline. That's not how the market works. Appraisers don't compare a 1,500 square foot house to a 2,500 square foot house when they're doing prices. They compare apples to apples. So let's assume we could build something, and we'll follow that regression line down right there. A lot of demand there. Let's put something new there for a change. That would be 229 per square foot. Your price per square foot goes up, actually. What if we did a 1,500 offering of whatever design? It goes up again. What if we even offered as a workforce opportunity at 250, 1,000 square foot unit? It would be $250 a square foot, but affordable. This does not bring your prices down. This brings your prices up. By the way, what about a garage? All those yellow dots are resales. How many of those resale closings, 960 of them, do you think have a garage? It's easier to show you how many don't. Boom. We don't need no stinking garage. We park in the driveway on the street. What's wrong with that? That's happened forever. And I don't know why we get stuck on having to have a garage. These people are spending more per square foot on a house that doesn't have a garage than they are on one that does. So we're talking about no garage and that price per square foot. I think we can compete and build new product, but we're going to have to innovate and look at doing something different. By the way, all that stuff less than 1,000 square feet, what is that? That's resale micro product. So tiny homes already exist. They're just old resales. I'll hurry up though. I want to show you again another example. This is where the zoning has pushed us to build new homes in that 35 to 4,000 square foot mark against resales that we built in the last 15 years. It's hard to compete with the resale we built 10 to 15 years ago. It's much better value. The resales down and to the left that under 2,000 square feet are much older resales. This somehow a townhome got approved in this city, and it's right there, and it's right on that yellow line. And so instead of being at 550, I think they got a lot of pushback from the local community because they felt like that 450 townhome was going to bring their prices down. That's not true, because the 550 house is $157 a square foot, and the 450 house is $200 a square foot. So I'm beating a dead horse. People are listening though. We are starting to see people innovate and produce product with one car, no car, optional, get the price point down. This is a Pebble Brook High School in Atlanta. West Highlands, same thing. We're doing cottages here with garage optional. Going to be right in the middle of the demand. I'm encouraged by this. And the missing middle really is the perfect bridge to the missing millennial. I'm going to show you some samples to end this with. I appreciate your time, but I do want to leave you with this. I asked this of our builders when it comes to missing middle housing, and I gave them 4 options. Most municipalities don't know what it is. They're eager to get on board. This option, the biggest consumer group, millennials, will eventually force you to allow zoning for missing middle housing, or we don't need to discuss it. So what did my audience say? They agreed with me. If the millennials can bring the retail industry to its knees, don't think they're going to leave housing untouched as they continue to move through the system. They not only embrace diversity, they seek it out. And this will happen. And I'm excited about it, to be honest with you. I think we've got a lot of great ideas. Let me show you some samples and we'll end with that, and I'll take questions. But these are some happy accidents. And this one was an in-town townhome that was supposed to be 24 feet wide. It contained a zone requirement for workforce housing that required a certain percentage of their units, 16 of them, to be a certain price point. The builder had no recourse except for to take his 24-foot wide plan and cut it in half. And you're looking at that Model C. Yeah, that's a 12-foot wide. I first looked at this when I was sent it to do a feasibility on it and said, it's not any wider than the window. What are you doing? And I heard the story on it. So the end result of this, and it does have a rooftop terrace, so it's 12 feet wide. You can reach out and touch the walls. These sold so fast, and their 24-foot wide product with the traditional 2-car garage didn't sell at all. This builder is now building this same plan in other places and getting it zoned, and it's working. So that's a 12-foot wide product. We've never built a 12-foot wide product in Atlanta ever. A 14-foot wide product. This one was not in town. This one's actually outside the perimeter. The builder on this one was so worried that they couldn't sell 14-foot wide townhome that they built a mock-up of the floors right beside each other in a warehouse, not far from the actual community as they were starting development. And they took people to show them what it looked like. And here's what it looked like. It's absolutely gorgeous. Lots of light, 14 feet wide, density that doesn't look like density. Look at the gable. This looks like a 28-foot wide townhome, but it's split down the middle. It's a beautiful architecture. It's density that doesn't look like density. Again, this was the lowest price in the neighborhood. They couldn't sell their detached and higher end townhomes. This builder told me if he could have built all 14-foot wide, they would have sold out in a very quick pace. But they didn't know it was going to work until they tried it. 16 feet wide. This is a very interesting product. And I love, this is how we're living today with the walkability and the communal things. Most townhomes built in the last 20 years are going to have the outdoor space as a deck hanging off the back. You've seen that. This is a very innovative builder who turned these facing each other and put the outdoor space in the front elevation. So I'm standing in one unit's outdoor space, looking across at the other unit's outdoor space, and there's a walkway, not a driveway, not a road in between. I'm telling you, people were hanging over the balconies, talking to each other, saying, hey, come over for a glass of wine tonight. How are the kids? This is our modern version of the 1950s front porch. We're going back to that kind of living, I think. I love this plan. It's sold very well, very small, one-car garage, 1,700 square feet. But I love that they turned them facing each other in that communal thing there. That same company is doing a pretty radical thing, 179 condos. They're going to be as small as 600 square feet and sell in the 2s, 3s. Again, never been done. I like this plan. I'm seeing people begin to think outside the box. This, instead of cutting the townhome down the middle, front to back, this builder is cutting them side to side. So you live in the back of the unit and the front of the unit. One unit is in the back of the house, one unit is in the front. So you get this firewall is right here. You get one unit garage here, one garage. So, and what happens is because one of these has a basement, you've got a variety of square footages, 2,000 versus 1,600. And your price point comes down. How did he get this approved? Because from the front, it looks like a standard 24-foot wide townhome, only you've got one family in the front, one family in the back, and the city loved the way this looked and presented itself. But instead of putting 6 units on the ground, he put 12, bringing the affordability down and offering something that people want today. So Courtyard Homes, same thing. This is on a 240 by 150 lot. 4 of them don't even have a garage. Sold very well. This is the Prairie Queen neighborhood after it's been finished, the first missing middle neighborhood in the country in the Midwest. Very pretty. I'll skip this. Greenville is actually putting missing middle housing as part of their comprehensive plan as they move forward. So it is beginning to spread. And I love the innovation that we're seeing all over the place. So I will stop and ask for questions and hope I didn't bore anybody.
Mr. Hunt, I appreciate that. And we've got a lot of comments here about just thanking you for the presentation. And one of the questions that came through is something that we see in this market is with moratoriums and moratoriums on multifamily homes or permit allocation systems. What is your opinion on those, and how can we best articulate that position to our elected officials?
Yeah, again, I don't know that there's a good answer to that. I think we have to look at what is the reason behind the moratorium, and I do understand, traffic concerns and things like that. Those have to be dealt with. But the part of that moratorium that might be done for the reason of keeping values up, which again, as I stand in front of city councils and county commissions every week with builders putting things through, that seems to be the common theme. I think to educate not only the city councilmen themselves, but the people who show up at those events or the homeowners who think they're going to be affected, and to show them that it doesn't really bring your price point down. That's an education process. And these people are not in our industry. And they don't really understand, I think, how prices are set, and the fact that a higher density product actually has a higher price per square foot. And that when you go for walkability, which I think people are looking for, you're going to cut down on that traffic. So I think you can address those things. But you have to get to the root of why is the moratorium there? Is it, a values, keeping values up issue, or is it a crowding, or what's the root of it? That's a very good question. Not easy.
Another question is, our next speaker is Shane Phillips from UCLA. And this question is regarding an article that he wrote about renting is terrible, owning is worse. And wanted to get your, are you familiar with this policy suggestion, and what opinions do you have on creative home ownership?
Yeah, I'm not actually. Can you tell me a little bit about it? I don't want to give away his presentation, but what's the basis of it?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we're looking at doing co-ops in terms of, building a denser building in Atlanta as a co-op, and letting the part of town actually invest in it, which is completely foreign to me. But I think, in anything that gets the end goal, of workforce affordable housing makes sense. So.
And I'll kind of leave you on this one. You had mentioned your work in other markets and how you work with planning boards and developers. Have you seen a good recipe for the conversation that takes place between the building community, the public, the planning, zoning boards, and how could we have a better relationship here locally to maybe enhance some of these suggestions that you brought forward today?
I think what you did today, and I've been, so where I'm seeing movement and progress, parts of Atlanta, we're seeing the powers that be begin to make changes in terms of, one of them was in terms of ADUs. Before ADUs, accessory dwelling units, were not allowed to have a kitchen, which makes them unable to be, sold or rented as a separate living space. We've changed that zoning condition in Atlanta, but it's been a joint effort with the building community, realtor community, and the city. Greenville has I think done a very admirable job in bringing those powers together and trying to, where it's not easy, it's a long process, but they did the same thing you did at that meeting back in 2018, was all the stakeholders together, just working through it. And I think we're starting to see that take hold. And again, I think my thought is that as the millennials begin to take some of our jobs away from us, that this is coming anyway, so we might as well get ready for it.
Well, I appreciate you giving us some time and making your presentation for us here today. I've been a fan of yours and watching and following your work. And so thank you again for making the effort. And
thank you.
We'll get you out of here on that one.
And don't hesitate to reach out. If somebody needs the slides, Josh, just let me know. We'll be glad to send any information out that anybody needs. So thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We're going to take a quick little break, let y'all get coffee or whatever you need. Make sure we have our next speaker lined up, and we will begin with Shane Phillips here just before 12:30. So thanks.
Thank you. See you in a minute.
Yes, sir. Okay, Shane, Rusty's going to introduce you real quick, and then we'll be good to go.
Great, thank you.
Rusty, I'll let you take it away.
All righty, I got just a few seconds before 12:30, so I guess we'll give them that time. How's it going, Shane?
I'm good. How are you?
Living the dream, man. Living the dream.
I caught the last most of the last hour, but as you can imagine, from the West Coast, it was a little early to see the whole
come
thing.
on, man. That ain't early.
Early for me. I've been working from home for a year.
I got you. Cool. All right. So I've got 12:30. So I want to welcome everybody back. Again, appreciate everybody's time today. So far, it's been a great event. I believe a great summit. Hearing from some of our local leaders, and also just hearing from Mr. Hunt. And now we're going to be privileged to hear from Mr. Shane Phillips. So Shane is a housing policy expert. He's originally from Seattle. He got a degree from the University of Washington in biochemistry. So that's is that right? All right. I
made a hard turn at a certain point. Yeah. Yes.
Well, see, we always get that in the real estate profession. I always talk to agents of biochemistry majors. No. But so he's an urban planner and a housing policy expert based in LA. He currently manages the UCLA Lewis Center Housing Initiative and has recently taught public policy at the other USC, for most of us on this call. That's the University of Southern California. But his research and advocacy take a yes and approach to housing, with the belief that there's no single solution to the housing crisis. And in his book, The Affordable City, he reviews more than 50 policy options. So, Shane, sure appreciate your time today. Again, like to remind everybody that you can raise your hand or put the questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end. But with that, Shane, appreciate you being here, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just so people are aware, I'm going to be reading from some notes to the side here. So if I'm looking away, it's not because I don't love you. I'm just reading some notes. But I really appreciate the invitation here, and it was very cool to hear the last hour, because I feel like John sort of did the supply and missing middle housing side of things for me. I don't have to worry about that, and so we're already ready to go. And so let me load up my presentation really quick. Share my screen. And for some reason, the PowerPoint specifically is not showing up there. One sec. There we go. Okay. So as Rusty said, my approach on all of this is very much a yes and kind of comprehensive, all of the above approach to housing. And I'll explain a little bit how I came to that belief and why that's captured in my book. But I'll start off by talking about the genesis of the book, which for me is traced back to this development here in Los Angeles, in Hollywood specifically, which goes by the name of the Yucca Argyle, based on its cross streets. And this proposed project is 200 units. It has 40 of them reserved for low-income households specifically. And just for context, the market rate unit in this building would probably run a minimum of $2,500 a month, just for a one-bedroom. But those 40 income restricted units would rent for closer to maybe $800 or $1,000 a month, depending on their size. And, that's quite a bit less than what many of the 50-year-old apartments in Hollywood that are not income restricted are renting for. Typical prices for an older one bedroom might be $1,500 or even up to around $2,000 a month. So quite expensive. And that comparison is important because this project would be replacing one of those older apartment buildings. It's not just being built in a parking lot or a strip mall or something like that. And it was actually replacing a pretty big apartment building that was 39 or 40 units total. And so if you're looking at this from a high level, this looks like an objectively good trade. You're taking 40 rent stabilized units in that older building, most of which probably would have rents in the $1,200 to $1,500 per month range. But you're replacing them with really one for one with 40 income restricted units that would mostly rent for $1,000 or less. And those units would be deed restricted to stay affordable for at least 55 years. Plus, you're getting 160 market rate units, helping to absorb growing demand, stabilize prices, create new tax revenues. And this is all a few blocks from the Red Line subway station. So the whole thing is pretty good for the environment too. And yet, the people who lived in that 40 unit building put together a really large and really effective protest against the project. And I want to explain why here. So the problem arises with this kind of overall good picture when we shift our frame away from that citywide or region-wide level and start looking at individual households. So yes, the rent stabilized units would be replaced by more affordable and longer-term low-income units, but it wouldn't be the current tenants who benefited necessarily. Some would earn too little to be eligible for those new units. Some would earn too much. And even among those who were eligible, they would be competing with hundreds, if not thousands, of other applicants for those 40 income restricted units just because demand is so high. The rent stabilized tenants in the old building would be evicted. And depending on their age and how long they'd lived there and other things like that, they might receive as much as $20,000 in relocation benefits. And that sounds like a lot, of course. But you might have some who are living on a fixed income, paying $800 a month in rent because they've been there a long time in their rent stabilized unit. And as I said, where a comparable unit might be $1,500 or more at this point. And so it's pretty clear in that case that $20,000 is not adequate compensation that's going to run out in your new unit's rent within a year or two. And so, of course, the tenants are going to oppose this project. And I want to make clear, I don't think they're NIMBYs for doing so. This is like a real tangible harm that is being done to them that is completely out of their hands. And my main takeaway from this story is that, yes, the big picture, the region-wide benefits, the greater good absolutely matters, and we have to take that into account. I came to housing as a supply person. I think that is the most essential thing and what we are doing worst at in most places, but it can't be the only thing. We need to also be concerned with how individual people and individual households are affected. We have to look at both, to take both seriously and to try to maximize the benefits while minimizing or even eliminating, where possible, the harms. And, I think we can get so focused on one or the other, focus areas, and we end up scaring away a lot of people who might otherwise be allies. And I really think a lack of allies is why the positive changes so many of us are working for and hoping for are not often coming to fruition. So to put this in simpler terms, I think in housing policy, we often find ourselves in factions. And, on one side, I would say we have the stereotypical pro-housing advocate or YIMBY who, looks at a project like the Argyle and asks the question, who benefits? And that's an important question, absolutely worth asking. On the other side, we have tenant advocates who ask who is harmed. And that's also a really important question. And I do say stereotypical pro-housing and pro-tenant advocates because I know many people are already asking these questions. And the message of my book, The Affordable City, is that we all need to be asking both of these questions, and that when we do that, better policy and stronger partnerships, importantly, will follow from that. So here's where I get into the sort of themes of my book, which I call the 3 S's of supply, stability, and subsidy. Broadly, this just means building enough homes for everyone who needs one, protecting renters and other vulnerable households in their homes, and providing adequate funding for the gaps left in those first 2. And each of these goals serves a different purpose, and each has to be a priority for different reasons. And I always make clear that, for me, this is not just a policy statement, but it is really a political one too. We're not going to build the coalitions we need to make these positive changes we're working toward if renters, young people, people of color, low-income households, and many others feel, sometimes justifiably, that new development is not for them, and in fact, it is a threat to them. And so that's, I think, something we have to take seriously. So in terms of what's in the book, just to run through this really quickly, it's really two sections. The first is 60 or 70 pages, just introducing these three S's, why they're important, providing some general recommendations that don't really fall into either of those three buckets. But most of the book is a deeper discussion of each of the three and about a dozen policies within each of those sets. And there are things, it's 3 to 5 pages maybe for each one, because there's 55 total policies. It's really intended to be a handbook as much as anything else. And some of the things you'd certainly be familiar with, where and how and what to upzone, reforms to parking requirements and unit type restrictions, carefully designed rent stabilization and eviction protections, housing vouchers, property taxes, all that kind of stuff. Others are things I think we tend to talk less about, like how we support low-income homeownership with very limited resources and other people who might be even more in need, creating a less cyclical boom and bust development sector, rental housing registries, and so on. So my goal with the book wasn't to propose a bunch of new ideas or put a whole lot of, it was really to put a whole lot of existing ones in one place and demonstrate how these things can come together. And I want to talk a little bit about that today here. And I do want to be clear that, I wrote this from my experience and what I see, especially in the places I live. And, I think different policies apply differently, not just comparing to Charleston to LA, but comparing Charleston to Columbia or Greenville too. The policies will differ, and in fact, even amongst neighborhoods, I think you'll see different things. There is no one right answer to this stuff, but I think we're not having the sort of depth of conversations that we need to, and the nuanced conversations that we need to about a lot of these policies. So jumping into why supply matters, I think this group, I most likely don't really need to convince of this. But supply for me is just about acknowledging physical and economic constraints in the housing market. We can't have affordable and accessible housing if we don't have enough homes for everyone in the first place. That's just a very clear physical reality. And if more people want to move to a place and they have the money to do so, no amount of wishing otherwise will keep them out. And I don't think that should be our goal anyway. And, on the economic side, scarcity ultimately empowers landlords at the expense of tenants, sellers at the expense of buyers, and sort of implicitly older folks and, older generations at the expense of younger people. And, I want to say that growing demand is it's a good thing if your city is the type of place that people want to move to. But we want that demand to manifest as increased production and availability of housing and an investment in the community, in making things better, not just rising prices on a relatively fixed supply of homes. And so, for each of the three S's, I think it's really important to acknowledge what they can and cannot achieve, not just why they're good, but what they can't do and why the others might need to fill in some gaps. And on the supply side, they can absolutely make things better. They can stabilize prices, create new resources, whether that's taxes or affordable housing, or, if they're providing parks and that kind of stuff. But, housing, it takes time to approve. It takes even longer to build. It doesn't always go exactly where we need it because, it depends on what's available at any given time. And of course, zoning and everything matters too. But ultimately, you're not going to turn a city where the median home price is $700,000, as it is in LA, into a city that is $300,000 median price just by building a lot of housing. There's a lot of things pushing against that. And maybe we can get there in 30 years, and that's worth striving for. But we have to think about what do we do in the interim as well. And I won't dwell on this, but if you run into people who are kind of skeptical on the supply side of things, I think probably one of the best things written is this article by Vicky Bean, Ingrid Gould-Ellen, and Kathy O'Regan on supply skepticism. They really tackle pretty much the whole range of arguments against providing more homes to address housing issues and housing prices. The one thing they don't address, because this was in 2019, is this question of what happens at the very local level. We know that building more housing helps at the regional level to moderate prices and keep things more affordable. But does development actually raise the prices of the apartment building down the street? Because it's the signal to landlords that this is an up and coming area maybe, or The new building provides some amenities that have improved the neighborhood. And so there has been this question that up until literally just a couple of years ago couldn't be answered because we didn't have the appropriate data to answer it. And but now it has been answered pretty definitively, and hopefully more research is coming. But 5 out of 6 papers that have studied this question of when you build market rate housing, what happens to the building down the block 100 feet away, 300 feet away? And the answer is it actually helps keep prices down. There's probably an amenity effect or a demand effect, meaning, you know, there is some additional attraction, but that supply effect outweighs it. And that's the second paper that myself and some colleagues just summarized recently, which quite a few people have found useful for their own advocacy. So moving on to supply, or stability rather, if supply is about responding to these physical and economic realities, stability for me is about meeting our moral obligations on housing. You know, I think a person shouldn't lose their home simply because they have the bad luck, if you want to call it that, to live in a neighborhood or a city that's suddenly gentrifying. The corollary to that is that a property owner probably shouldn't be able to claim 100% of the upside if their property happens to be in a gentrifying neighborhood. It's not the fault of the renter that this happened to where they live. And frankly, it wasn't caused by any individual landlord. No one has that power. And so I think there's a role for local, state, whatever level of government to play in moderating how those changes impact both parties. Not to say that you're, you know, taking all of that wealth and redistributing it to someone else, but just to kind of slow down these processes in some cases at the very least, because this change can happen so rapidly and have such harmful impacts on people. So again, what it can and can't do, stability policies can and do protect millions of households here in the US from rising rents, from illegitimate evictions. But I think it's important to acknowledge that they don't actually make things more affordable. They just keep things from getting worse as rapidly. And that's an absolutely important goal, is really important. I don't mean to downplay it, but it's clear that it's not enough by itself. And, you know, I think the problem we often get into, especially in higher cost cities, is we enact these tenant protections and stability measures thinking it's going to solve our problems, when really they are tools for slowing down our problems and kind of putting the brakes on them somewhat while we do other things that really will address the root causes. So on subsidies, this is for me just a tool that we can apply where supply and stability policies fall short, which they will. They're not going to work in every case. And so subsidies will help fill that gap. And, you know, as much as how we spend the money is important, it's also important actually how we raise the money, not just to generate as much funding as whatever our city or state feels is necessary, but also because well-designed taxes and fees can serve other important goals like reducing housing speculation, encouraging housing production, those kinds of things. And on the flip side, poorly designed taxes and fees can actually discourage these things. Here in California, Proposition 13, which is a strange property tax restriction, has had just a cascading level of effects, and it's a really great demonstration of unintended consequences from tax policy. So in terms of what subsidies can and can't do, again, help millions of people. We have low-income housing tax credits, housing choice vouchers, these kinds of things, but they can't help everyone. The reality is it would just be too costly. When we fail to provide enough supply and keep people stably housed, the number of people who need assistance only grows, as we've seen over the past decade. And the cost of helping each person rises as well, because, you know, the cost of building is higher, rents are higher, and so forth. So again, without the right supply and stability policies, subsidies are sort of just digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole. So a very sensible and frequent question I get about this is, you know, how do these goals interact together? Won't stability policies like rent stabilization, for example, undermine housing production? And won't supply policies cause displacement and housing instability in some sense? And I think the honest answer that I have to give is that yes, you know, there are consequences to our actions, and we can't stop all harm from happening. We do have to care about that greater good. But if we take these trade-offs seriously, we can design policies that maximize benefits and minimize harms as much as possible. So just as an example, if you enacted a relatively strict form of rent control, or this would be a very strict form of rent control, and actually applied it to new buildings, you really are going to reduce the production of new housing. It's essentially guaranteed. There's no avoiding that. But if you do just literally one thing, which is exempt buildings, say 20 years old or younger, which isn't really the housing we're super concerned with its affordability anyway, at least the stability of its affordability year to year, you probably address 95% of your issue right there. And so, whether you think that rent stabilization is right for your city, it's just illustrative of the fact that how we design these policies matters so much, and it can't just be rent control is good under any conditions, housing supply is good under any conditions. We really have to ask how and where and why and all those follow-up questions. So what should we be looking at? I only provide this slide just to note that there's a lot of things to consider. These are just from the table of contents from my book, things to look at and spend some time thinking about. I'm not going to get into these, of course, and happy to talk about specific policies in the Q&A. Better to kind of get a sense for what people are really interested there rather than me guessing here. But just to kind of get some high level stuff out of the way here, on supply policies and upzoning specifically, a question we often ask, and rightly so, is, supply is essential, but how do we do so with sensitivity to impacts on vulnerable populations of all kinds? And, there's some straightforward responses to this, and they're politically challenging. I don't mean to underplay that at all, and we'll get to some communications things here in a little bit. But, things like upzoning in many places at once rather than concentrating changes to a few small areas. I think we get in this trap of, well, we're going to do the community plan for this neighborhood, and then a few years later, we're going to do the one for another neighborhood. And, in that interim period, you've got one neighborhood basically where it's really advantageous and legal to build housing, and everywhere else is kind of shut off. And you're probably going to have sort of a flood of development in that one neighborhood, and then neighbors might not be super happy about that, and the impacts might be greater just because of the rate of change. Whereas if you can spread this out a little bit and make sure you're allowing for a lot of housing in different places, and missing middle really fits in well with this, because you can upzone, pretty modestly to allow for missing middle housing, and you can really do so anywhere, because as John said, you're not even really changing the quote unquote community character in many cases when you do so. Of course, upzoning in higher income communities where people actually want to live based on home values and rents is a clear one, probably the most politically challenging one, but it does, these are places where you tend to have more owner occupation, and so you're not going to have involuntary displacement. And of course, upzoning or rezoning commercial corridors where no one currently lives. Easy way to avoid displacement there. There are, of course, many other general policies to support supply and reduce housing costs. So, allowing for micro units and other types of housing that kind of vary from the traditional form, more so eliminating or reducing parking minimums, eliminating or increasing density maximums, permit streamlining, since I know there are a lot of city folks associated with cities here. I think that's one that really is, there's no cost to it. It's a really straightforward one that we're actually doing some research on here in Los Angeles right now, and I think is undervalued for how big of an impact it can have. Of course, it depends how quickly your city is approving projects right now. So on on stability policies like rent control, again, I suspect there's a little more skepticism about things like rent stabilization in this group, and that's perfectly fine. But just to make the point that, we can stabilize rents without really affecting housing supply if we do things like exempting new buildings, don't set the annual cap on increases too low. Obviously, no developer is writing a pro forma presuming that they're going to raise their rents 6% a year in perpetuity. If they did that, the bank would laugh them out of the room. So, if we're not setting these things too low, we're not going to get in too much trouble. Where we can get in trouble is vacancy control, which is where restrictions on rent increases carry over between tenancies. And that's something that does not have a great track record and is much more something to avoid. And then again, more general policies to support stable housing, just cause eviction protections, right to return when you can do it, right to counsel for tenants facing eviction, these kinds of things. And on subsidy policies, I don't have, I'm not going to get into specific recommendations here, more so just kind of observations that I think maybe should inform how we approach subsidies today. One is that the US used to subsidize something like 300,000 units of housing a year. Now we subsidize about 100,000, despite having 100 million more residents than we did back when we were subsidizing so much more housing. And so we've got a lot of catching up to do. I'm not a person who believes that we can or should try to solve all of our problems by just spending our way out of them, but we're spending a lot less than we used to. And that's going to have a particularly big impact on the lower end of the market. Property taxes are good. Again, this might be, some people might not love to hear this, but it's a wealth tax, which, I think in many respects is better than an income tax. It's more kind of equitable. And a great case study is to look at Vancouver, BC, where they have a property tax of about 0.26% and basically the most expensive real estate in America. And a lot of like actual housing speculation in a way that is kind of oversold in most other places. But this is something where, if you want to just buy a property and even keep it vacant in the long run, if you're only paying 0.25% property taxes per year, there's not a lot of cost to doing so. If you're paying 2 or 3%, there really is. And you're going to try to find, the most efficient use of that property and maybe build it into more homes, for example, rather than keep it as an underutilized parking lot or a strip mall or something like that. Homeowner subsidies are something that I think, everyone champions at different times, and I still think they have a place. But things like the mortgage interest tax deduction in the long run, certainly some people benefit from this. But for one, I think roughly half, probably more since the 2017 tax cuts, half of the money is going toward households earning $200,000 a year or more. And subsidies like this tend to get capitalized into the price of homes. So what you're really doing is raising the barrier to entry for lower and middle income households. It's saving higher income households a lot, but it's raising the bar for everyone else. And then finally, impact fees. There's different ways to assess impact fees to pay for parks, infrastructure, that kind of thing. When you assess them by unit, you're basically taxing smaller housing types, as opposed to doing so by a square footage basis or even a bedroom basis. When you're doing it by unit, you have situations like here in LA where the parks fee is $10,000 per unit. You're paying that whether it's a 300 square foot micro unit or a 3,000 square foot penthouse that's sold for $5 million. And there's something clearly wrong with that. And that's a simple thing to fix, but not something that people often give enough thought to. So I'm going to conclude here pretty quickly, and I'm going to talk more about some communication sides of things. I think the policy stuff, the thing about policy is, especially in housing, it feels like mostly we know what to do. It's just a matter of convincing people that we should do it. And everyone here, I'm sure, is familiar with the arguments against really any kind of change to our housing policy, land use, housing market generally. So some things that I've found somewhat effective, and you'll notice that these are all questions for the most part. They're not telling people how they should feel. They're just asking, what is our current policy really achieving and who is it benefiting? So, who benefits from rising property values? Prices, when your property value is rising, so is your neighbors, most likely. And so it's not as though you can sell your home and move into a nicer neighborhood, because that nicer neighborhood is also getting more expensive. You're probably seeing your taxes go up. Your kids are more likely to never be able to live in your city, at least until you die. And on top of that, your city is going to end up spending a lot more of its money to address housing affordability issues, homelessness, all the things that follow from that. if your city's residents want to cash out, if that's their goal, and leave for another city or state or country for that matter, and live like kings somewhere else, then rapidly rising values can be good for them. But is that who our housing policy should be serving and really benefiting most? And I realize, talking to many realtors here, this is probably like, if there's a group who benefits from rising prices unambiguously, it might be realtors. But I'm not sure if this is like known within the realtor community, but there's some really interesting research that when prices rise, it's not typically a windfall for realtors. What you have is a lot more people entering the market to become realtors, and everyone sort of ends up spending more of their time just searching out business. So they have fewer deals overall, but each one is worth more. I'm guessing that many of the people here are a little more seasoned and veterans and really good at their jobs. So maybe you'd be fine either way. But at a societal level, it's clear that these rising prices faster than inflation is not sustainable and is going to catch up to us at some point. For making these arguments for change, I think, and this is not just about housing, this is really kind of any policy area or social area for that matter, arguments about fairness are usually very effective. So asking questions like, is it fair that future generations should have to pay a larger share of their income on housing than past generations, especially when they're also paying for student loans, especially when the minimum wage is lower today in real terms than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Is it fair that people with stable housing and often significant housing wealth should dictate what types of housing are quote unquote appropriate for those who don't have those same resources? Is it fair that property owners who are much richer on average should capture all of the benefits of home appreciation, and renters should really pay all of the costs and bear all of the risk in that sense, when these changes are mostly out of individuals' power to influence? And is it fair that places with the best jobs and schools and the most climate-friendly lifestyle options, among other things, are also where we are the most anti-growth? And just a few more here. So on acknowledging systemic harms, John, again, by talking about the color of law, did a great job. And I echo his calls to read that book. It is a very, very good book and eye-opening on multiple levels. I think what I often see, though, in housing policy, and John did not do this, is and this is sometimes done in bad faith, people hear that single family zoning came about for racist reasons and that it perpetuates racist and racially inequitable outcomes. And when they hear that, they think, are you calling me racist for living in a single family home or liking single family neighborhoods? And the answer is absolutely not. An institution can be bad. And if you as an individual don't really have an alternative but to participate in that, that's not really your fault. And we should be clear that we're not blaming people for that. Where maybe we can blame people is once they know how our housing policies originated and the harms that they inflict, not just in the past, but to the present day, are they willing to make the changes necessary to stop those harms? And that's usually not an individual change. Again, like most of our homes are single family because of policy. We need to change that policy. But if you stand in the way of those changes, you really do become complicit in that. And I think we need to be able to make that distinction very clearly to people so they don't feel like they're being attacked when we're just trying to explain why the current system is not working. And finally, something I always share is do not wait to act. Don't let yourself become Los Angeles. Definitely don't let yourself become San Francisco. So much of our time is spent, I think, or I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to clarify what I mean by this. It's so hard to find solutions when the gaps between what is considered affordable and what it is profitable to build are so great. I mean, here in California, in many places, a low-income, income-restricted unit that's built with like the low-income housing tax credit, for example, might rent for a third or a quarter as much as a similar market rate unit. And when people see those market rate units going up and renting for $3,000 a month or more, they, rightly question, especially if they don't really understand how this all came about. Who is this for? Why are we doing this? Why are we only serving the rich? If you can build homes for $300,000 or $400,000 all in, and that's the cost to the buyer, like, God, build as many as you can, because if you don't, they're just going to be $500,000 or $600,000 later, and convincing people that we need to build those even more expensive homes is going to be even more challenging, because they're not going to help the people who live in the city right now quite as much. So I think, so much of our time is spent worrying about how we hold on to the present and maintain the status quo. But I want to just make the statement that we can make things better, not just keep them from getting worse. And not just better than they are today, but better than they were in the past too. And I think that's what needs to motivate us. And the message we communicate to our friends and neighbors and peers. And, responding to these challenges, it doesn't need to be a burden. It's not just something we do to avoid catastrophe. It really is an opportunity to improve the quality of life in every community, regardless of their current wealth or privilege. And I think that that kind of positivity is what's ultimately going to carry the day. So that's just about it for me. The one I wanted to look up a little bit about Charleston before I gave this presentation, and really my only question is what is going on here? The first thing I did was search for it in Google Maps, and this is the map of the municipal borders. So if I can start with a question to you, I would love to know the story of this, because this is a bananas map of a city, and I'm really curious how that came about. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Yeah, we have an interesting story where the city of Charleston, started on the peninsula, and through law, you're able to annex, and water is considered a contiguous border. So you start reaching across rivers and annexing into James Island, then West Ashley, Johns Island, and spreading over to Daniel Island. So we're kind of surrounded in that way. And then you have areas that don't want to be annexed into the city. So we then have donut holes that are in the county. Recently, in the last decade, James Island stood up their own government. So you have a lot of conflicting interests with regards to the city of Charleston. So it can be a little difficult to discern who picks up your trash on what day, things like that. So
yeah, I mean, for this is comprehensive planning summit, right? And it seems like you got your work cut out for you trying to plan with those kind of borders, where it looks like kind of building by building, you're either part of the city or not, and it's up to you kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean,
it's an interesting way to plan.
It gets interesting for rezonings and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the questions that came up in the last session, and it refers to you, so I'll start here. Your recent article about renting is terrible, owning is worse. Can you talk a little bit about those policy suggestions and what opinions on creative home ownership you may have?
Yeah, so this was an article I published in The Atlantic, and I guess the genesis of that was I've been thinking about the politics of housing as much as anything, because as I said, I think we generally know what we need to do. It's just hard to do it and hard to get enough people on board. And part of the reason it is challenging, in my view, is that, homeowner politics are not great. They are protectionist. They are, conservative in the small c sense of the word, where they just think change could be a threat, even if maybe it isn't, and might actually improve their property values, but they'd rather take that kind of conservative approach. And so I was thinking about, well, if we wanted somewhat better politics, maybe if we had more people renting, that would be good. But of course, you look at the wealth comparison between homeowners and renters, and I can't in good conscience say everyone should rent, because renting as it's structured here in the US right now mostly is terrible. And we treat it as, you know, the analogy I used in the Atlantic article is it's sort of like how we treat the minimum wage and kind of like young workers. It's just, you know, yeah, you're not getting paid much, but it's just a step along the ladder. Yeah, renting sucks, but like you'll eventually own a home. And then you can enjoy that ladder of wealth and everything. But the reality is that that ladder is increasingly inaccessible to many people, especially in very high cost cities. And a lot of people who are, you know, in any other previous generation of the past 100 years would have had the prospect of owning a home before too long. Some just don't. It's just probably never going to happen for them, at least if they want to stay within, you know, 50 miles of where they are now, and where maybe their family is, where their job is, all of these things. And so, you know, my thinking is we have this very risky option of owning, and it works out great for a lot of people, but it works out terribly for many others, just depending where you are and kind of the good or bad luck that you have, and your region has. And it's risky, but it can pay off. And on the other hand, you have renting, which is flexible, and that's great. It's nice to be able to move as you like, as your circumstances change. And I think, you know, as new generations come up, people's circumstances are changing at a faster rate. They change jobs, they change where they live, those kinds of things. And so having that flexibility is good, but there's no wealth at all in it. You're really just giving all of your money to someone else. And so the question I asked, and I don't have really the right answer to it, but I think it's worth asking is there something in between? Is there a way to get some of the wealth and stability of homeownership without all the risk and being kind of locked in, and keeping some of the flexibility of renting? And of course, it would not have the same financial payoff, because it just can't. You'd have, you know, property managers and all these kinds of things. But if it could offer a portion of that, maybe that's something worth pursuing. And I think whether that's a private idea or a public idea or nonprofit, you know, I've actually talked to a lot of people in the last few weeks who've reached out who are trying things like this from many different angles. So it's just exciting to see people rethinking whether these two options that we have are the only ones that are possible. And you know, maybe 50 years in the future, we'll look back and feel like, really, those were the only two options people were given. Then again, maybe not. We'll see.
Well, one question that popped up, and something that we work a lot on are with our local governments, are that, you know, the development approval process, permit allocations, things like that. You know, we look at California and what is, you know, working and what doesn't work there. One of the things that the state did successfully was the permit system, to where the development approval, if a developer goes in, it checks all the boxes. It can get expedited permitting for things like affordable housing or you know, different market rate rentals, things like that.
Right.
Is that a system, you know, from your vantage point, that has gone well, or as we go through the development approval process in our own right, is that, what are the pitfalls that maybe we need to be looking out for?
So I feel like at the state level, there has not been, my understanding of how things work here at the state level based on recent reforms is not like a across the board streamlining. There are circumstances where if your city is not meeting its housing targets, which are set every 8 years, then as of a couple years ago, if a project comes in, if a developer comes in and proposes a project that is, depending on how far behind you are and how in what ways you're behind on your housing targets, if it's either 10% affordable or 50% affordable, and 50% really just means 100% because no one can build an unsubsidized 50% building. But the 10% one is really important. So if they come in with a project in a city that is not compliant with their housing element, as it's called, or not keeping up with their production, then those projects are basically by right. They're ministerial. There's no discretion. And just generally, I think that's the direction we need to move in. You know, discretion in housing approvals is usually what slows things down a lot and changes projects, mostly shrinks them. And it doesn't really serve a purpose other than to slow things down and shrink them. The argument for it is that, well, we need to have, we need to look at these projects individually and determine whether they're appropriate and everything. And one of my colleagues at UCLA, Mike Manville, did a really interesting paper. It was more just based on surveys. It's not super rigorous, but just kind of speculating that, we've had these growth revolts here in California, different parts of California over the years, with initiatives that, downzone or stop development in various ways. And what he heard from basically all of these people was this anger at discretion. And they didn't think of it in these terms exactly, but basically what they were angry about was city leaders would say, here's the zoning, here's your community plan or whatever, here's what you can build. But then developers would go to the city and say, can I get this change? And the city actually wanted them to do that. They would create a system where you sort of had to ask for their approval and for them to give you changes. And by creating that system, they're able to use that as leverage to get things from the developer. And they think, as the city, as representatives of the public interest, they're like getting something out of the developers for the public and see that as good. But many people who just live in the city, they see this as like corruption, basically. And they think of it as, we have these rules, why aren't you following these rules that you yourself set? And so I think really the answer is just, we need to do community planning. We actually need to engage the public and create good plans. But once we create the plans, we just stick to them. Really, it's as simple as that. And things move so much more quickly. And just from the developer perspective, to know that if you come to the city and like everything complies with the zoning code and the building code, and it's very clear what does and does not comply, the return on investment you're going to expect is going to be smaller because of that certainty, your risk adjusted premium and all that. And that's going to make more projects feasible and make projects more affordable. And so it's a really simple thing that frankly has no cost. There's a political argument against it, like you're taking away the voice of the community. And that's where I think you just need to make sure that your actual community planning process that sets the zoning and the building codes and all of that is really robust and engaging, so that when it gets to the decision-making time of approving individual projects, you can say, look, we put all this work into this plan and we're going to stick to it. And I think that's really the model that more places need to adopt. And I think a lot of them are adopting. And I think we're seeing it here in California too.
Nice. And that kind of leads into this next question that came in was, what types of incentives for a developer have you seen that work for affordable housing? The streamlining process, are there any models that you look around the country or even in California and see that is something that we should, maybe look at to modernize our zoning process?
Yeah, there's, I have quite a few examples in California, as like much of a basket case as this state is with respect to housing policy. It's big. And so there are lots of places doing good things at the same time as there are more doing bad things. So there are always good examples. Sacramento just recently, I don't know if this is technically law yet, an ordinance that's been approved, but it's definitely in the works at least, where they're pretty much saying if your project is, I think in many parts of the city, if it's under 200 or 400 units, it's just by right. If you comply with the zoning and everything, you just get to move forward. And that means you're not having these big carrying costs and all this risk of, putting up money up front and then just losing it because you don't get your approval, those kinds of things. But, looking to here in Los Angeles, one thing that we have done really well is our TOC program, Transit Oriented Communities program. It actually came about because of a ballot initiative, not because of the actions of our elected officials. But it's basically like a super density bonus. So, whatever the base density allows for, and FAR, floor area ratio, and all of those things, it basically says, if you're right next to a rail line within 750 feet, which is very close, That's tier 4. That's the top tier. You can get up to an 80% bonus on your density, I think 50 or 60% bonus on your FAR, and you don't have to provide any parking. And tier 3, which is a little further out and includes like rapid bus intersections and that kind of thing, is I think a 70% density bonus, 10% lower on the FAR bonus, and you can't require more than half a parking space per unit that's being built. And so it goes down all the way to tier 1. And that is produced, and I should say, to get those bonuses, you have to provide affordable units on site. It's either like 10 or 11% extremely low income units, or 14 or 15% very low, or 20-ish% low income. Basically, everyone does the extremely low income, for the record. And there's also additional bonuses, but you have to go through a discretionary process. Even though the city can't technically say no to you, you're still discretionary because they're making a decision in some way. But you can get additional height, you can get setbacks, these kinds of things, which a lot of projects also really want to do, because maybe, they get that extra density and FAR, but, their height is low enough that they can't really do anything with it. So they have to request kind of an on-menu incentive is what it's called. So that's been really successful and has kind of kickstarted development here in the city and produced thousands of income restricted units over just a few years at no direct public cost. And all of the affordable housing developers use it too. They really love it. And if you're not familiar with our ADU, accessory dwelling unit law, that's probably one of the biggest state successes that we've had, where ADUs have been technically required. The state has technically required cities to allow them for, I think, decades, but they were never built because cities just found ways to make it impossible to build. And the state, over the past 5 years or so, has just steadily kind of tightened the screws and said, no more fees, no more parking requirements, no more separate utility hookups. They're just like playing whack-a-mole, basically. And, in 2017, when I think the law went into effect, the city of LA went from maybe a dozen or so new ADUs a year to 3 years later, we're now at thousands, literally thousands per year. And these are things that, relatively modest income homeowners can do. And there are new financing options coming out where you don't have to have $200,000 or $300,000 on hand. And banks are kind of catching up and figuring out that this is a stable product they can loan to. So I think that's a really positive story here too.
It's funny you brought that up. That was one of the questions that just came through was, we deal with ADUs in different varieties. We have 36 municipalities within our footprint here at the association. So each municipality has their own rules on ADUs, and the fear behind them varies. Sometimes it's about they don't want the short-term rental market to be used, so you restrict ADUs. It could be something else, but there are success stories, like you just said, where an ADU can help with the housing market. Can you go in a little more about that relationship in California between, because that was a state law, right? That incentivized or pressured municipalities to allow them.
Yeah, as I said, it's been very successful here. And, one of the appealing things about ADUs is they tend to be much smaller. Here in California, you can't build them, I think, over 1,200 square feet. And in some situations over about 640 square feet. So they're just, in the same way as micro units, which are even smaller, they're like a separate home that actually is, just by nature of its size, relatively affordable. And that's positive. Here in Los Angeles, we now have short-term rental restrictions where you're basically not allowed to rent out a whole unit for more than 60 or so days a year. So this market for just like buying or building a home solely to use it as short-term rentals doesn't really pencil out anymore. And I think that's a positive thing overall. I think it's fine to like rent out your unit while you're on vacation, or, rent out a room or something like that. But you really are taking housing off the market when you're renting it short-term full-time. And so I'm totally cool with short-term rental restrictions like that. I do think, one shortcoming to ADUs, and this is more of a short-term thing, is I suspect that a lot of the people building them are doing it for short-term rentals, or they're doing it for just like to have an extra space, like when family comes visiting or something like that. Or maybe, they're thinking in the future, maybe their parents will move in or something. And those are all fine reasons, but they're not it's not the same as like building a new apartment or something like that, where it's definitely just going to go to a household full time. And so it doesn't necessarily have that same impact. But on the flip side, the thing that I always note is the person building it maybe has these other intentions for it that are not long-term rental or sale, if that's possible in any of your municipalities. But whenever they sell their home, whenever they sell their property, the person who buys it from them, the person who's going to be willing to pay the most is going to be the one who wants to earn revenue on that ADU. And so ultimately, they're going to win the bid. They're going to buy that property, and it's going to become long-term rental housing in most cases, even if it wasn't built with that intended from day one. So I think that's a really important thing to note, and maybe a reason to be, a little more flexible with short-term rentals. If it kind of produces some, if it helps spur production a little bit, and then eventually it gets to become a full-time unit, that might be worthwhile.
Thank you for that and kind of walking us through that. One of the things you had mentioned was the extremely low percentage of renters, qualifiers, and then it's a tiered to another level or percentage of market renters. What have you seen with those relationships, and how do they blend when you have the diverse socioeconomic entities living in the same space?
Yeah, honestly, I haven't really heard much about it. I know, there was a controversy maybe 6 or 7 years ago in New York with pour doors, as they were called, which was basically like you had to provide, income restricted units in your building, and the developers would actually like build whole separate entrances for those residents. And at least here in California, you're not allowed to like segregate the units into one corner of the building or only the lower floors. It has to be like a cross section of the building, basically. And yeah, honestly, I haven't really heard anything about that being a problem. And you would think if there was any place it was going to be a problem, it would be with extremely low income units, right? Because these are people who earn 30% of area median income or less. So if people have concerns about like those kinds of people, it's going to be people earning in that income range. And I want to be clear that there's often a racist element to that. There's certainly a classist element to that. And a lot of times people are just kind of working their way up like anyone else. But to take the concern seriously, because I do think people have the concern, if this was really bearing out that there are problems, I think you would find that developers who have the option to provide a little more of the very low income or low income units, which are effectively double and triple the incomes of the extremely low income units, you'd probably find them trying to build those instead and having those tenants instead, but they're not. Almost all of the developers are choosing to build the extremely low income units, and it's more financially worthwhile for them. But if it were causing problems where like the market rate tenants were unhappy, then it wouldn't be the right financial decision for them. So that doesn't seem to be what's occurring.
I have a question. This comes from me. One of the things that we often talk with our municipalities about, or even the school district, is about the use of land. We're land dependent. Half of our border is an ocean, so we can't grow more land. a lot of our municipalities and different governments talk about, being in the real estate game, and the land that they own.
Yeah.
Some want to divest of that responsibility and sell it off. One of your chapters, you talk about, don't sell public land, but lease it. Can you talk about those public-private partnerships and how that arrangement works from your vantage point?
Yeah. And, I think there are certainly times when just selling off the land makes sense. But generally speaking, if you think about if your city had sold its land 20 years ago, I'm sure it wishes it had it now. And same is true 40 years ago and so on. It's nice to have just the continued revenues from it, because you can probably count on them being higher in the future than they are today. And then also, having some flexibility with how you use it in the future as well, depending on what's built on it. So how this is usually done is ground leasing. And this is a complicated thing. And, especially smaller municipalities, this is not going to be an option in all cases. It does require really kind of expert negotiators on your side to make sure you're not taken advantage of. There have been some really terrible public-private partnership deals in American history and have kind of soured people on it, I think, rightly in some respects. I think the worst / best example is Chicago selling off its the rights to the revenues from its parking meters for something like 75 years for like $1 billion. And so they sold it for 75 years and it paid off the investors their entire investment in like 10 years. And now that it's just, a windfall for the next 65 on top of, and it's like causing these additional problems where anytime the city wants to remove a parking meter because they're like revising their street layout or those kinds of things, maybe trying to make it safer for bikes and pedestrians or add a transit lane or something like that, they have to compensate these investors every time they remove one because you're removing their revenue. And so it's just been a disaster, and you don't want to end up in that kind of position. You want someone on your side who really knows what they're doing. But if you do it right, you basically say, like, you can use this land. Maybe we'll even rezone it for you and make it more valuable. And you just have to pay us, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year in perpetuity or until the end of the lease, which is often 99 years. And then the land reverts back to the city. And by that time, whatever's been built on it, you probably want to replace anyway. And obviously that's sometimes done with condos, which is challenging because having condos where you don't own the land is a little bit dicey, but doing it with things like office space or apartments is relatively straightforward. And we have some cases like that here. Marina Del Rey is the biggest one. And I think it's in my book, that example where the county basically built an entire marina. They filled in some of the marina with land and built thousands of housing units. And now, they spent back 40 years ago or so, 30 or something $million, and they're making 10 or $20 million a year on it now. I think that it's doing very well for them. And so I think those things can work. Again, you just have to make sure you've got the right people on your side and not trying to negotiate this stuff yourself, because the people you're negotiating with they know more than you.
In this, I know we're bumping up against time, and I'll get you out of here on this one, but you talk about funding and how those different types of reforms can take place and what they look like here locally. Like the city of Charleston, for instance, they did an initiative years ago where they bonded some money. They have a fairly robust affordable housing fund. The county is looking at setting up a housing trust to do some different types of loan programs with developers. How have those relationships played out in California with housing trusts and municipal bonding for affordable housing projects and lender programs to for-profit and not-for-profit developers?
Well, we've certainly done a lot of the bonding side, both at the state and the local level. So the city of LA bonded $1.1 billion several years ago to build supportive housing, permanent supportive housing for unhoused residents primarily. and the state has bonded just billions and billions every year, basically. And it's very useful for, matching LIHTC, low income housing tax credit, and other like federal sources, because the LIHTC program is really the main source of affordable housing. And usually any local or state money you're using is being used to secure those dollars. And so that's been positive. As I said, I think subsidies ultimately can only go so far if you're not addressing the broader housing market. Like if you're just letting everything get more and more expensive overall, the cost of each new unit is going to keep growing and you're just going to get less for your money. So you have to do all of these things. My Atlantic article in a sense is almost talking about trusts. It's talking about, either public ownership or sort of like a regional nonprofit co-op that could exist. And I think those would be really interesting approaches. The thing with land trusts, and it depends very much on the market. There's land trusts that exist in very expensive areas, and they're just trying to take housing off the market to stop it from getting so expensive. And there are land trusts in really depressed areas where they're trying to like fight blight and tear down, decrepit homes and that kind of thing. And so if we're talking more so about protecting affordability, the former case, which I think we are, I like them, but I've not really seen them scale. That's really the biggest issue, is how do you get like a community land trust where you buy the property and sell it at an affordable rate, and the person who lives there gets maybe a small amount of appreciation and they pay off equity, but they can't just sell it at market rate. It's restricted whenever they sell it. It's restricted so it stays affordable. The problem is you have to come up with that money up front, and that's a big subsidy on a per unit basis. And so how you scale that up to a really big system, I just don't know the answer to that yet. I'm not sure there is a good way when it comes to helping people who just don't have enough income. I think you just have to spend the money. A lot of what I'm focused on is we've gotten to the point where even if you do have a decent amount of money, if you're like solidly middle class, you might still be struggling. And how can we do what we can for those people without spending money, so that public money, so that they can kind of take care of themselves as much as possible, and we can reserve the funds we do have for the people who really need that support.
Appreciate it. The last question, I've had a few of these come in. Everyone wants to know what the picture of, where is that?
This one?
The one.
Oh, this? I don't know. I'll have to like email. You can send out a follow-up. I should figure that out. I looked it up. I knew at one point. Yeah, this is, I just thought it was a nice picture, and it's a place I would like to live.
Well, Shane, I appreciate you giving us some time. I'm a big fan of your book. I use it a lot as a resource when we work with municipalities on a lot of these conversations that we've talked about today. So thank you again for making time for us here in Charleston. And
yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, sir. But that is it. I know I took up a lot of time today. I appreciate everyone who attended today. Rusty, you're the man. I'll let you sign us off here.
All right. Well, again, yeah, I want to thank you, Josh, for, help coordinating this. Quite frankly, I don't feel like I've ever sat in anything where within a 3.5 hour time span, I've listened to all the mayors speak, and, Supervisor Cribb, and then again, just getting to, I guess kind of more national high level thinkers and people that do this all day. So really appreciate your efforts putting this together, along with, I know we partnered with the home builders and the Urban Land Institute as well, right?
Yes,
so yeah, appreciate everybody's time, and thanks again for being here. And hopefully we can all take this information and this knowledge and use it and continue to help our association and our communities become better. So appreciate it, Josh.
Thank you.
See y'all later.